Good evening and welcome to the Jinn&Tonic show on Friday, the 21st of December, 2018. Tonight's show, Does Allah Commit Shirk? And I want to welcome my co-hosts, well certainly my long-standing co-host, Stop Spamming, and our regular panelist and our presenter for this evening, Thunderous. Good evening, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
So welcome to all of you who are viewing. And we will start with something that Stops will do now as a sort of beginning to each show. So all over to you, Stops.
Okay, just so that people remember, we're not in any way smashing, bashing, attacking, or anything Muslims. We are criticizing bad ideas in Islam. And if anybody has any suggestion, any kind of justification or anything that he wants to suggest or criticize or comment, you are more than welcome to do so. This is not a one-way thing, only show. We think that this is a platform where we can discuss Islam. That's what we're doing. So I'm going to start off with a goodie, because we're not only criticizing, we're also praising. And this, I think, is a good thing, because this comes from volume 3, book 46, number 693 in Bukhari. The Prophet said, and it's by Abu Huraira, of course, and the Prophet said, whoever frees a Muslim slave, Allah will save all the parts of his body from the hellfire, as he has freed the body parts of a slave. And Said bin Sa'id bin Mariana said that he narrated that hadith to Ali bin Hussein, and he freed his slave, for whom Abdullah bin Jafar had offered him 10,000 dirhams, 1,000 dinars. That's good, I think, that you get rewarded and you get a real tangible result if you are going to free a slave. Even if you bought the slave or captured the slave, if you repent and you get rid of the slave again and give this slave freedom, and there are different, remember we talked about this partial freedom and things like, but if you manumit a slave, brilliant.
Cool. Yes, we all agree that there should be no slavery. So anything that goes in that direction is something that can be agreed upon. Good. All right. So let's get into some comments here. And I haven't got too many, but there's a few fascinating ones here. And then we'll get straight on into Thunderous's presentation. So let me share the screen here.
Come on, guys, don't destroy something so nice. Because in the chat they're saying, yeah, but it said a Muslim slave, not an unbeliever. Don't be so nitpicky.
All right. So this was a response to a post. I can't remember. It'll come up to me as we go here. But this Muslim fellow said, these are parochial. This was slavery. That's right. This was slavery. These are parochial considerations. Parochial, for those who don't know, is like, small, not as important considerations. And if I war with your peoples, I too shall administer them as slaves. Do your people maintain slaves, or do you call them prisoners? Dehumanized animals in zoos, an export of your peoples that now proliferates the world in its entirety, an exercise in semantics. That's all there is. So this fellow is obviously equating prisoners with slaves and claiming that somehow they dehumanized animals in zoos. So and then he sort of carried on from there. I missed it. Wait, hang on a second. Where's my other one? Oh, that's not what I wanted. I said something else here. I responded, but I don't seem to have that one. Anyway, I'll look for it. He basically then said, I made some comment about, I said, that's right. I said, hey, this is a crazy comment. This will be on my list of crazy comments. This guy is equating slavery with prisoners of war, etc. And his response was quintessential white de facto pink dreg of humanity, touting his inherited facade of cultural, moral, and intellectual preeminence, while yet maintaining the largest human zoo apparatus man has ever come to know of. And I responded, impressive stringing together of meaningless words with no evidence. Now, another one for my crazy comments. Keep it coming. So this fellow thought he was fairly smart by stringing together some words there for which he had no evidence. So I thought that was interesting. And here was one. So there was this conversation between Armin Navabi, who's an ex-Muslim, the Sunni fellow, what's his name, Daniel somebody, and Imam Tawhidi, which I think has become infamous on the internet now. And so this person said at the bottom here, absolutely beautiful. Proud of our Muslim Sunni brother Daniel. You couldn't make this up. An Orthodox Sunni Iranian, whatever his surname is there, versus a complete shameless sellout of an Uncle Tom, Tawhidi, and a vile Islam-hating ex-Shia as a host, Ahmed Nawabi. So Ahmed said at the top, obviously, the vile Islam-hating ex-Sharia host. I should put that on my resume. So that's the sort of response that some people have. And again, we're clear to say that's not all Muslims, but we pick up these sort of comments to highlight, and I don't know that, and there probably are one or two atheists and Christians, but I don't see the same thing. And again, people can point me to that in such a wide variety. I mean, this is on Facebook, this is on, we get things like this on Hangouts, it's on YouTube, it's on virtually every platform you see these sort of comments. So, and I do not see the same sort of thing from Christians and atheists, although I admit that there will be, the odd Christian and atheist that will probably say things like this, or perhaps even worse. But it seems to me anyway a lot more ubiquitous with some Muslims. This is a bit small. I grabbed this from you, Stops. Oh no, this was mine. So this was Adnan trying to defend, I think, freedom of speech, which was, it was terrible. So this fella put here, Adnan is too sharp for these fish breath bigots. And somebody responded, Muslims worship prostrate to black stone Kaaba in Mecca. Islam is based on a pagan cult, not Abrahamic faith. Qur'an 42:52, and so forth. But I what caught my eye was this thing about Adnan being too sharp for these fish breath, and he was actually having a conversation with Joseph. It's online, probably on Content Over Everything, I'm imagining, because they capture most of these sort of things. And obviously he was trying to agree with Joseph, who obviously is against anti-Semitism, etc. So he was trying to agree and then equate that and suggest that we should limit speech, and we should particularly limit speech when people are, quote, slandering or maligning the Prophet Muhammad. So that was his whole thing. So he tried to agree with, but the reason he was agreeing with Joseph, who's a Zionist Jew, is for his own good, because once he agrees with Joseph, then of course he can put forward, well, hey, if you're doing that for you guys, then we deserve the same. And this fellow sort of fell for it by saying that Adnan was too sharp. So I thought that was amusing one to add here. This is a beautiful one. Here's memes that are on this particular. So if you want to go on Facebook and join Haram Memes, brother made a very beautiful meme, Science and Islam. And our wonderful brother here, Zakir Naik, seems to be the one that can bring the two together. And at the bottom there, the fella said, my dear brother, very good meme. So for those who don't know, Zakir Naik and science are antithetical. You couldn't find somebody who's less science, who's more unscientific. You probably could somewhere in the desert.
But I'm a medical doctor.
Yes. Brother, and if you want to see how little he knows, look online, Zakir Naik versus Young Evolutionist or something like this, where this little Indian fellow, he's in a big hall, he's an atheist, and he's in a big hall, and he managed to get up. He's pretty brave. It's a massive hall. They're all Zakir Naik followers. And he asks him a question about evolution, and you just see it go downhill from there. He has no clue whatever. He doesn't have a clue what theory means, firstly, and then doesn't have a clue about evolution. And this guy goes backwards and forwards. And then, of course, Nike gets a bit tired and sort of talks over him. And the entire audience, of course, claps just like sheep. So worth watching. But I did think that was interesting, that he, of all people, could bring science and Islam together. That really was amusing. And here's one from the Apostate Prophet. So, and somebody else brought, if you haven't seen it, Hussein Radwan got banned for 30 days on Facebook for repeating what other people were saying about him. So this was not him saying something. He was putting comments from other people who critique who he's getting death threats from, etc. And the same sort of thing happened here. So the Apostate Prophet put in things that other people had quoted and then got a ban and violating the rules as well. I think this would have been probably on Twitter if it looks like. So I just wanted to bring this up again, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit later on, Stops, when we get onto a few other topics as well. So I just wanted to bring that up as well it just happened to come up there. So there we go. That's it for our crazy comments at the moment. So on that note, is there any questions? So if I just want to see before we carry on any of the comments there. So if there's a question.
No.
Okay, cool. All right, with that, let us hand over to James. James, I'm going to hand over to you, and you can let us know if, in fact, Allah could or does or did commit shirk. I'm going to be listening with interest.
Hi, everybody, and certainly my pleasure again to present another article on the Jinn&Tonic show. And tonight we will be discussing, does Allah commit shirk? First of all, we have to understand what shirk is in Islamic parlance, and you'll find from every Muslim scholar for $1, from Faker Naik, Yusuf Estes, and all the other Peace TV personalities, all accept swearing or to make an oath by other than by Allah is to be making a partner with Allah. Therefore, swearing by anything other than Allah is committing shirk. So let's take a look at a couple of hadith to see how we can formulate our response to our Muslims and their claim that Allah doesn't commit shirk. Let's look at some hadiths now. Sahih al-Bukhari 6108. Allah forbids you swear by your fathers. If one has to take an oath, he should swear by Allah or keep quiet. Sahih Muslim 4040. He who has to take an oath, he must not take an oath unless but by Allah. Sunan Abu Dawud 3242. I do not swear by your fathers or by the rivals to Allah, and swear by Allah only, and swear by Allah when you are speaking the truth. Sunan al-Nasai 3795. Whoever swears, let him not swear by anything other than Allah. Sunan Ibn Majah 2095. Do not take oaths by idols, nor by your forefathers. Jami al-Tirmidhi 2534. The messenger of Allah came across Umar while he was on his mount, and he was swearing by his father. So the messenger of Allah said, verily, Allah prohibits you from swearing by your fathers. So the one who swears, let him swear by Allah or keep silent. And finally, Jami al-Tirmidhi again, nothing is sworn by other than Allah. For I heard the Prophet and Messenger of Allah say, whoever swears by other than Allah has committed disbelief or shirk. So what are the situations then where somebody may have to swear? Well, when somebody makes an oath or makes a pledge or swears by anything, what in effect are they doing? When a person makes an oath or swears by another person, the person is the object of the oath or sworn statement. By is seen as being of greater value than the person actually making the oath. For example, a person swears by or makes an oath on the lives of their children, their parents' deathbed, or their marriage mate, hence highlighting the significant value as superior to their own life, but also testifying to the value of the reason of the oath in the first place. For example, a plea of innocence or the fulfillment of a vow. Objects are taken for oaths too. When a person swears by or an object, they are testifying as to the objective value of the object taken as collateral for the oath. Examples being a person may make money, gold, house or car, or any other item of collateral value as a pledge of the oath. Likewise, also, they are highlighting again the validity of the matter for the oath in the first place. A person never swears or makes an oath on the life of a person who is of no significance to them. Doing so would merely expose the weakness of the person's vow. 2. Oaths are based on the collateral of oaths based on collateral of minimum or irrelevant value are likewise not taken with any seriousness. A person who swears by a used tampon will be seen as foolish as a person who swears by a scorpion, dung beetle, or an electric kettle. So likewise, Allah, who we will see repeatedly swears by objects from an objective point of view, are significantly less than he is merely highlighting the perversity of his own oath as well as the valueless of the reason for the oath taken in the first place. So let's look at some Quranic examples and see where Allah is taking things as oaths or pledges. We'll look at 36 verse 2. The Quran, Allah here swears by the Quran, full of wisdom. 38:1, by the Quran, full of wisdom. 43:2, by the book that makes things clear. 50 verse 1, by the glorious Quran. 51 verse 1, by the wind that scatters far and wide. 56:75, I swear by the falling of the stars. 68:1, by the pen. 74:32, by the moon. 77:5, by the angels who bring revelation. 79:1, by the angels who violently pull out the souls of the wicked. 81:15, I swear by the stars. 84:16, I swear by the sunset redness. 85:1, by the mansions of the stars. 86:1, by the rain-giving heavens. 89:1, by the daybreak. 89:3, by the odd and the even. 90, Surah 2. I swear by this city. 91:1, by the sun and its brilliance. 91:6, by the earth and its expanse. 92:1, by the night when it draws a veil. 95:1, by the fig, the olive, and the mount, and the city made secure. Looking at this comprehensive list surely gives us enough ammunition to clearly expose that the greatest shirk committer of all time is none other than Allah himself. Allah is swearing not by himself. He certainly can't swear by anything greater than he is, as there is nothing greater to Allah. So what is Allah in effect doing? He's taking something less of minimal collateral and therefore swearing by that. If Allah has to make an oath or a pledge based on a collateral, then Allah cannot be taken at his word. Why would Allah feel the need to testify or make a testimony using something as collateral? A person in a given situation where they feel they need to take a pledge or make an oath or to swear by something is merely highlighting the circumstance that they are in. They are relying on their own reputation and using the collateral that is normally, or in every single time that I'm aware of, is of greater value to themselves when making that oath or that pledge or that testimony. They are never taken seriously if they're using anything less. But here, Allah, by his own creation, is taking something less than him. He's taken the whole of creation as a testimony and a pledge, as an oath, against the person he's making the testimony to. So what does that say about Allah? But when we look at Muhammad's accounting of what Muhammad says taking a pledge or making an oath it is an act of committing shirk. You're making a partner with Allah. So by implication, Muhammad himself, as the revealer of the revelations from Allah, has written down or had it put down that Allah himself, by implication, is the greatest shirk committer of all time, as the surahs clearly reveal. And there we go. I would love to hear from Muslims, to hear how they will respond to the number of verses provided where Allah himself is making a swearing pledge. Thank you.
Did you count them?
No, I didn't. And I tell you why I didn't count them. I could have actually gone on and on and on, because when you actually read certain verses, like 91 as an example, 89 verse 1, it says there, by the daybreak. And more often than not, in some surahs, it goes on into verse 2, verse 3, verse 4. It's not just one, and I didn't want to elongate it. And if I did each item, if you like, singly, I probably would have got into about the 30s or the 40s. As far as maybe, you know,
there's
like
dozens of these, okay.
3 or 4 dozen times where Allah is taking something. And it's interesting to note as well, the older the Quran you use, they actually use the word swear. I used 3 Quran translations for tonight's discussion. I used the Pickthall, the Sahih translation, as well as one issued by the IDCI, which is the Islamic Dawah Center International, Jerusalem. So I've used 3 different translations for this information, and I find that the older Qurans that you use, they actually have the word swear there. The later translations of the Quran have it rendered by the daybreak or by the rain given heavens. It's almost like they've deliberately omitted the word swearing out because of the implication of what the word means.
They realized it, yeah. Okay.
So guys, let me ask you, as someone who's not as well read as the two of you, what is the typical, or have you ever put this to Muslims? And if so, between you, can you give us, for interest, for people out there who are watching, the responses that you've had? Now, clearly, if Muslims are watching, they may well go, yes, I agree with that, or no, I've got a better response. And if you are a Muslim and you are watching tonight's show and you want to respond to this, let us know in the chat. and we will arrange for you to come on the show. But from the two of your guys' experience, what have Muslims said in response?
From my own experience, I'm going to be honest with you. I can't recall any responses. The reason being, I've discussed that many subjects over the years. I may have mentioned this particular one 3 or 4 times, and I don't recall what the responses have been.
But you will come on. You will remember, because the standard thing that it draws your attention to. It points out. It's a sign for the people, for those who want to believe, for the knowledgeable, for those who are of understanding. These are the typical things that you get from them.
But the thing is, you see, I totally get your point as to why you think I would remember. But I think in the latter years, my Islamic default arguments have been more based on things that you can't argue with. I don't like getting, if you like, a discussion based on words, and it's almost like then they'll say you've taken this out of context. You know, when you guys have a discussion, your normal, from what I discern now, your normal default will be something like the inheritance. You just can't get out of that. You can't wrangle or give yourself wiggle room on that discussion. So that would be one of your strengths as far as an argument against Islam is concerned. I have found with this, and I have my own, if you like, arguments against Islam for Muslims that are my own defaults that I fall back on. This has been one that I've used in the past, but I've not found it's not proven to be successful for me. I've just realized something. I've actually missed something out in this discussion as well. I don't know if I can just introduce something different as well, just briefly.
Go ahead. Yep, and then we'll welcome in Weiso.
I was just going to say the apologetics that I've heard for this.
Hold on one sec, Weiso, and then we'll bring that in. Just finish this off, Thunderous, and then obviously welcome to the show as well. And then we'll go into some more responses so people out there can hear some of the responses that have come up against this. Yeah.
What I want to do was bearing in mind that the Quran and the God of the Quran is supposed to be consistent with the God of the Torah and the Zabur and the Gospel, the biblical narrative. I wanted to bring out 2 points from the biblical narrative. I'll just continue then as a continuation. Hebrews 6:13 says, "For when God made his promise to Abraham, since he could not swear by anyone greater, he swore by himself. I will surely bless you and I will surely multiply you." So after Abraham had shown patience, he obtained his promise. For men swear by someone greater, and their oath is even the end of their every dispute, since it is a legal guarantee to them. In this same way, when God decided to demonstrate more clearly to the heirs of the promise of the unchangeableness of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, in order that through two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we have fled from refuge, have made strong encouragement to take firm hold of the hope that sets before us. And the other point I want to bring out was when a person sorry, not that one. That wasn't, I've already done that one, wasn't it? It was actually what Jesus said. Jesus said in the Gospel, in the Sermon on the Mount, I think it's in Matthew 7, somewhere about there. He basically says, "Do not swear by anything. Let your yes mean yes, and your no, no. Anything greater than this is from the wicked one." So even the biblical narrative makes it quite clear: do not swear by anything. To swear by anything is basically something like an incitement from the devil. Let your yes mean yes, and let your no just simply be no. That was the point that I wanted to bring out. It's not consistent with the biblical narrative as far as this simple subject is concerned.
I was actually interesting. I was actually going to ask you that, because what would be the purpose of Allah swearing by anything? Surely Allah, well, God's word, whatever, is like an oath anyway. Then so to add the word oath is what for what's the word, to make it sound even more important, perhaps? I mean, what argument would somebody give for that? Because you don't need to. If I'm the ultimate one, whatever I say is in fact my bond, my word, it's unbreakable. So adding the word I swear by, or making quote an oath, how does that make it better than you just saying it if you're an infallible being?
There's the point, isn't it? I suppose I don't understand the Quranic narrative as to why it's not consistent with the biblical one if they're supposed to be the same God. The God of the Bible doesn't take anything as an object of, if you like, as a pledge or as an object of an oath. His word is his word, and he makes that quite clear. I make an oath. This is my word. This is what I'm going to do. And as it quite clearly states, he's not one to lie. He doesn't need to. God, if there is a God, he doesn't need to lie, does he? And why would he? He doesn't have to. He's God.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is also that Jesus makes it clear that if you do take this oath or make this pledge or swear by something, you're actually doing something that's incited by the devil. He's the one that's encouraging you to do something like that.
And presumably Muslims will deny that he said that verse or something like that.
But then if they're going to deny that Jesus said that, then they may as well deny John 14:16, where Jesus turns around and says, "I will send you the Comforter." Then they may as well turn around and say that you can deny that Moses in Deuteronomy 18:18. Where's your cutoff point with what people said in the Bible and what isn't?
Yeah.
Well, for when they quote it, it is either a book that's been corrupted or it's not. But then that's a separate subject.
Yeah, that would be another one.
Thousand-year-old question.
Stops and okay. So welcome to Why So Religious. Well, Stops and Why So.
There's one thing first.
Okay. Go ahead.
Before he goes, can I have one more point?
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Because there's one more thing where I find that Allah commits shirk, and that is in the very, very first sentence of the very, very first chapter in the very first Quran, where he says, "In the name of God." In other words, this God is speaking in the name of another God who is much higher than himself.
Yes, yeah, in the name, yeah.
And still doesn't give the name, right?
Would it not be better then if he just said, "In my name I say"? That would probably
exactly.
Yeah, and that's not said that way, right? And the Arabic says the same. So this is not something where you can go, "Oh, it's a mistranslation," or you're not translating it accurately. So based on what we've said, what sort of responses have you had to this sort of argument where it's put forward to Muslims that Allah potentially commit shirk?
Well, there is this channel, There Is No Clash, on YouTube. I'm showing it right now, and they specifically have talked about the fig and the olive swear. And what I've heard from various Muslims is that the swearing that Allah does to these things are parts of His signs. If you start at the Qur'an as being the sign of Allah, and then the Qur'an itself speaks about how the sun, the moon, the sky, all these things are signs of His majesty and His oneness and all that. And then when you talk about the fig and the olive, Muslims will say he's swearing by things that people need, right? Like we need the moon. Now, of course, they didn't know that we needed the moon, other than for the 3 reasons that Allah said, and the stars and such, the 3 reasons for those. But the apologetic simply comes down to the concept of Allah is swearing by the things that humans need.
What about the odd and the even? Do we need the odd and the even then? Because Allah swears by that too.
Stop this.
What's your reference for that one, Thunderous?
89:3.
Let me bring up a few of the verses, because I think that would be helpful for people to see. 89:3, you say?
Yeah. By the odd and the even.
89:3. Hang on a sec. You obviously went through a lot of
roulette.
Sorry?
No, but the thing, we need to appreciate that a lot of this stuff is just plain showing off. This is what people try to put in there to show, we know all these things, and that's why you find them in there.
Oh, on that previous image that Why So Religious brought up, it said, I swear by this city, Mecca. Mecca wasn't a city. Mecca has never been a city up until now. So how could it have been sworn by a city that wasn't a city?
Oh, we've lost Why So. I think he's dropped off there. There he goes. He's back.
No Clash makes up like almost everything. There is.
Sorry,
this is so bad.
What are you saying, Stops?
What was being saying? I'm sorry. Y'all were breaking up and I got booted out.
You better now? Can you hear us clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, go.
Well, the stream is very bad quality. I don't know why.
Is it?
It's actually quite low. I don't know why.
It's because Allah controls.
What No Clash is doing is making up stuff left, right, and center. As soon as you see anything on No Clash, you need to question it. So even if they say in brackets Mecca, then you know this is totally wrong. So it's nonsensical. Everything what they are saying is nonsensical. You're quite right. There is no evidence that Mecca ever was a city up until a couple of, I mean, even decades ago. Before, it was just a village somewhere, and that was it. And there's no reference to Mecca before the 5th century or 6th century anyway.
But carry on.
Yeah, because I don't want to go off topic, but I mean, it is one of those things, isn't it? Because from what I understand correctly, what I remember growing up was Adam had something to do with Mecca, and I don't know how many other people. Then the next person made mention was Abraham and Ishmael having something to do with Mecca, and then after that,
they built the Kaaba.
Well, they built the Kaaba, yeah, and then the next thing you have after that is Muhammad. Now, if Mecca has been this location since the dawn of mankind on earth, it surely would be the greatest city of all time. But as you've correctly mentioned, Stops, no cartographer mentions it, no trade route mentions it, no Indian, no Jew, no Christian, no Roman, no Greek, no Babylonian, no Egyptian, no Assyrian, no Medo Persian ever mentioned Mecca.
Yeah, and Shabadabadu, no. Mecca is mentioned in the Quran once, and the other one is Bakka with A-K-K-A. But Mecca is mentioned once.
But
yeah, I just put the link into the verse.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so obviously we don't know of any, it wasn't a thriving city as you mentioned. But getting back to responses from Muslims, again, interesting to note for people who are watching, and especially if you're a Muslim, people like Hamza Tortoise, which again, inexplicably some Muslims follow and feel is an authority in some field or other, also explicitly has spoken out against this No Clash website. So you can go look online, interestingly enough, and there's a video of, I'm pretty sure it's Hamza Tortoise saying, these brothers, I know they're doing well, they want to share the message, but this is not a good way to do it, etc. So I would not, recommend Muslims go there or pay this attention, etc. So for Hamza Tortoise,
yeah, I mean, that page actually popped up on mine. I've been watching them since their second video. It popped up on my so I was actually going to do videos about them, but I just was like, man, this is the first thing you could just attack is that this non-Muslim woman is trying to propagate Islam, and then that's when you should just walk away right then, right? Like any person who doesn't believe in Islam and is propagating it, or any religion for that matter, is a no-go for me.
Oh, I think she was hired, if I remember correctly, and I think Stops knows a little bit more about it. But she was hired. She's
I did some research. Claire Forestier, of course, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is she a West? Is she based in the West somewhere, or is she actually
in
based
London,
in the East? Where?
London.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so they hired
her.
They're
England.
Yeah, I mean, it's a high production value.
She's a professional presenter. I did this in my. I showed the whole connection in the video on embryology.
Oh, okay, good. If you still got it, Stop somewhere that it's visible for people, pop it in the side chat.
It's in my Quran Claims Reality channel.
Maybe you could find it. I'll have to just put it into the side chat for people who are interested, because some people think we make stuff up, and the last thing we want to do, I personally, and I think I speak for everybody in the panel, want to accurately represent what the Quran or Hadiths say, as well as what Muslims say. There's 0 point for us here, I believe, to strawman anybody. What's the point? It's so easy to uncover this and to expose this. I want to hear what their, quote, strongest arguments is and what they actually believe, and play it back or represent it to them, that they can go, yes, Rob, you have represented, you've understood what I've said. And so often we come up against interlocutors on the Muslim side where they don't do this. They intentionally or unintentionally, or whatever the case may be, do not represent us. I was listening to, Stops on a hangout with 6 or 7 Muslims in his element there. And there was a battle of understanding there. And to represent his position, I must have heard it about 10 times say, that's not what I say. And maybe the question that we should ask, and we'll get onto this later perhaps, is, hey, can I summarize what you just said to make sure I understand what you are saying? Because once you've done that and the person says, yes, that's pretty much what I said, I'm happy with that, that's pretty accurate, then you can go ahead and critique it. Because if they're not going to agree with you off the bat, then they are, and quite rightly, potentially going to say, hey, you're strawmanning me, and now I have to go back and tell you what I really believe. And so, that's something I think we all want to do. So, yeah, I thought.
Now, I would argue that one way that's never been brought up about really does Allah commit shirk is that Allah took Muhammad's words and added them into the Quran 10 years later. If you read Tabari, there's a section in there where Muhammad is still inside of Mecca. Okay, he hasn't performed the hijrah, so he's still there, and he says to a person that he does not want to stop until all of Arabia declares that there is no God and Muhammad is his prophet, or they pay the jizya. Now, that was years and years before the 929 verse that has jizya in it. So where did Allah get this idea of making disbelievers pay jizya? It came from Muhammad. So if Allah is taking his cues from Muhammad, that would be a form of shirk. Or if you want to think of it as with the satanic verses, if Allah, right, at the beginning of all eternity, and the only reason that these verses were going to exist is because Lucifer, the devil, Shaitan, however you want to say it, put words into Muhammad's mouth, then that means that Allah was influenced by Shaitan to include certain words inside of the Quran, and that it wasn't really his own doing.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose why. So I'll just play devil's advocate, and obviously you guys can respond. I suppose Muslims could say, for example, some of those things, Allah is presenting this to Muhammad at certain times, rather than him taking it from Muhammad as if he never knew. Of course, if he's all-knowing, he would know what Muhammad's going to say. So it came, this is just a defense they could use, and of course, shoot me down. You know, I'm just thinking, what would they say in response to you? And that could be one where they're going, hey, it's only revealed because this is the perfect time for it to be revealed, rather than Muhammad coming up with it out of his own head. And then, you know, Allah apparently following Muhammad. It's no, it is the other way around, but this was the specific time.
Yeah, but that doesn't sit right with me, because the Quran is supposed to be eternal. It was in heaven before it was on earth for eternity. So why would those words be eternal if they're indeed in the Quran? And as Why So Religious was speaking, he actually reminded me of a Quranic verse in Al-Azab 37, where it reads, "It behoves not a believing man or a believing woman when Allah and his messenger have decided a matter, that they should exercise their own choice in the matter concerning them. And whoso disobeys Allah and his messenger surely strays away in manifest error." That's an interesting verse. You know that Allah takes counsel from Muhammad, and Muhammad counsels Allah as to what matters should be. At what point is that not shirk then for the pair of them? They're committing to each other, because this verse, this surah, is supposed to be eternal in heaven before it came on earth. It's just that you just reminded me of that religion. Why so?
Yes, religion? And to continue with that, this concept that every time it says obey Allah, it also says and his messenger in the Quran. They're pairing together. And Allah is here, right, in the Quran to give his authority, to give what Muslims are supposed to do in sentencings, punishments, and crimes. But yet, this is where you see Muslims, let's say, that support stoning, right? Allah never supported stoning in the Quran. So when Allah says that you can follow whatever Muhammad says, and that's allowed, that's a form of shirk, because people come up to them and they say, hey, we found this woman committing adultery. What are we supposed to do? Muhammad is supposed to quote the Quran. He is supposed to say, oh, you either house arrest her or publicly whip her or exile her. You're not supposed to, Muhammad is not supposed to say, stone the bitch, right? And then people are supposed to follow Muhammad's words over Allah's. But this is the form of shirk that Muslims have started to equate any concept, any ruling that Muhammad had as definitive, you know, as that is parallel to Allah's Quran and what he says should be the ruling.
Yeah, but hang on. Muhammad can also forgive sins. Don't forget this. So this is also another form of shirk.
Yeah.
Can you
Absolutely.
provide the verse stops? I like to put it on screen for people so that they don't think we're making stuff up. Do you remember a verse from that?
From the top of my head, no.
Oh, okay.
I need to look it up.
Okay.
That,
No, I just
that's not
I
a
think-
verse. That's a hadith.
Oh, is it?
No,
Yes.
Quran.
No, you got one in the Quran. I think what I'm going to encourage us to do, and I know some of our friends do this as well, is if we can put it on screen, because I know Thunderous, you went through some great stuff there, but it was obviously I was listening to you, but I do want to put things up so that people who are watching the show back can see it, and so if you direct me, I can quite happily do that if it's available in QuranX or Sunnah.com or somewhere else.
Or what I can do is I've got it on my iPad. Is when the show goes on YouTube, I can cut and paste the references so people can see it in the comment section.
Oh, that'll be brilliant. Or give it to me and I'll put it in the description as well so that it's there
Yeah.
as well. Otherwise it sort of shifts, disappears, etc. So yeah, that'll be great.
464.
Sorry, it's
464.
464. Let me bring that up. So Quran Surah 464. Hit go. Okay, let me share the screen here. I like to share this so that people don't think that this is being made up. I think most people who know us now, know we don't make stuff up. So there we go. Yusuf Ali Pickthall. I mean, I can bring up another translation if that's helpful, whatever, which let's just go with Pickthall. It's shorter. We sent no messenger save that he should be obeyed by Allah's leave. And if when they have wronged themselves, they had but come unto thee and asked forgiveness of Allah and asked forgiveness of the messenger, they would have found Allah forgiving, merciful.
Oh dear, I never knew
Well,
that.
I mean, I read that differently. I mean,
Go
I'm
ahead. What's your interpretation of that?
That's, of course, you ask Allah for forgiveness, and then Muhammad is a very bitter person in the hadith, right? He's always very bitter. So I take it like, you ask forgiveness of Allah, then you ask Muhammad to forgive you, and then that will give Allah to forgive you. Now that's just how.
Why would you need to? And especially for people once he passed.
Well, it does say inside the Quran that you're supposed to love the Prophet and fear Allah, right? So the thing here is they're fearing Allah because they're asking forgiveness, and they're also they're trying to gain the love of the messenger, right? That's just how I take it. Now, of course, I'm sure somebody's going to clip that, and that will become a new Muslim apologetics we'll hear about in a few months, but like, because they don't come up with anything new. But I don't know. To me, that just reads as, you fear Allah and you ask for forgiveness, right? And then you personally ask the messenger while he is alive. You ask Muhammad while he's alive to forgive you, and then that's forgiving for Allah.
Yeah, I mean, again, if we're asking the book, then if we were to go with that line, I'm not just, and again, maybe you've thought about it quite a bit. Just my initial thought is that would probably not be that strong, because then you would expect the Quran to say and ask forgiveness of the messenger while he lives or something like this. But again, even if it said that, the question is, why would you need to? If all you need to do is ask forgiveness of Allah and he can see your heart, etc., then, and especially if you couldn't get to Muhammad, you never met him, and even if you lived at his time, what would be the point of it? So yeah, I'm not sure. That doesn't sound strong to me. I mean, I understand how you're reading it. It doesn't sound like a strong objection that I think a Muslim would bring. And I think it seems to me a much clearer reading that you're asking Allah for forgiveness and the messenger. And that's,
well, okay. So asking Christ, let's just say Jesus, right? For forgiveness, and asking a preacher for forgiveness is not the same thing either, because you're asking God for forgiveness of metaphysical or outer worldly spiritual reasonings, but you can do wrong to the preacher and still ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, but I think, and I mean, Thunderous is here. I think the Christian narrative is that you can ask for forgiveness through somebody else who's an intermediary. Whereas, as far as I can tell, that would be considered shirk in Islam. I don't know. Thunderous, what's your view?
If you look in the Sermon on the Mount, there's a passage where I'll get the reference if you want, if you give me 2 minutes, but I'll just summarize it now, where it says that if you've got a problem with your brother, first sort your problem out with your brother, then go and speak to God. And then, if in prayer. And I think the context for that is, if you've got a problem in your heart or in your mind, and it's kind of like distracting you, when you go to prayer to God, you're going to go and approach him somewhat distracted. So he wants you to sort out with your problem with your brother first, and then you can approach God. So then you've sorted your problem out, so to speak, and then you can approach God without the distraction. I dare say it's an analogous to, like, for instance, if you've got two children and they're both squabbling with each other, and one of them comes to the dad and says, and trying to have a conversation with him, the dad say, look, go sort your problem out with your brother first. Go and resolve your issues, and then come to me. So it's kind of like a family thing. But I think the one you're talking to about, go speak to the older men of the congregation, I think that's the one in the book of James, where it says that if someone's spiritually sick, let him seek the help of the wiser men in the congregation, and they'll pray over him. And I think that happens, or the context of that is when somebody has done something quite serious as far as, say, the Christian lifestyle is concerned. Let's say, for instance, he's found himself having sex with a woman, which is against scripture if it's outside of the marriage rules, or if he's had a cigarette, or maybe he's just punched someone's lights out, and he's stricken with a guilt. He will then go and speak to those older men of the congregation, look at the situation as to why it happened, and then try and put him back on the correct path. That will be the situation. It's nothing like what we're seeing with Allah Muhammad. The contexts are completely different. You cannot, if you like, put the two together. They're totally two different principles.
Okay, right. Good. Is there anything else on this then? Obviously, stops. That was a good one. Obviously, everything that Thunderous has given there, and I really wanted to hear, and we haven't got any Muslims who want to come on here. I wanted to hear, and obviously Wise has given us some, and stops. If you have any other responses, I'd like for the audience to hear, whatever we think Muslims have said, whether we agree with it or not, but an honest representation of what Muslims have said. Because if we don't have a Muslim on here to challenge this, then it looks like it's just too easy. And clearly, Muslims have probably thought about this sort of thing and will have some sort of response. So I'd be interested in what you guys have heard, and obviously I've heard some of those things. Is there anything else, or indeed is there any other verses that point towards committing shirk?
There are probably more surahs if I had the time to actually go through each chapter, because you find these surahs at the beginning of the chapter. They're never sort of like halfway through or towards the end, because it's almost like as each surah is being revealed to Muhammad, some kind of oath is being taken, or some kind of swearing is being taken, almost maybe not so much for Muhammad, but for the audience of Muhammad. There is some kind of like conviction or need of convincing being placed there in the oath, so that the rest of the surah could be manifest amongst the minds and the hearts of the audience that were listening to Muhammad. So there are probably more there, but it was a laborious task to get as far as I did.
Well, thank you for doing that. Anyway.
It's fine, Nubby. But let me ask you something. I am appalled that you would have missed 23:14. How can you miss this, Thunderous? Really?
let me get my Qur'an.
Bring up 23. Well, he's mentioned it now.
He's exciting me now. 23:14.
No, I'm going to bring it up on screen.
No.
Stop challenging there. So here we go. 23:14. Then fashioned we the drop a clot. Then we fashioned.
No, just the last sentence.
Oh, so blessed be Allah, the best of creators. Is that the part?
Yeah.
So blessed be Allah, the best to create, Yusuf Ali.
The best of creators. How many creators do you have?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Abu Lolo's favorite verse is actually probably the best one for that Muhammad and Allah are the same, so that they're like interchangeable of shirk, and that would be at chapter 11 verse 1 through verse 3, where the Quran, throughout the whole time of it, Allah tells Muhammad, when Muhammad is supposed to be speaking from himself essentially, but it is in the Quran and God's holy words, where there's various times where it says say, and then that's Muhammad speaking. Well, in 11:2 of it, it's just Muhammad speaking. It's just there is no say in it.
Exactly.
it's
slipped
just
out
Muhammad.
out of what is it? Out of role.
Out of character. He broke
Out
character.
of character. Sorry, that was the
not,
one I was looking
he's
for.
not
Thank you.
He's
Exactly.
not the method actor. You know, he's not Daniel Day-Lewis of his time. But yeah, so that's one that Abu Lolo he brings up a lot. And as you can see here at 11:1, it's starting off with the Alif Lam Ra scripture, the the revelations were from who are perfected and then expounded, right? And then it never changes to saying. That saying is in parentheses because it's not there. The Arabic, it doesn't exist. Serve none but Allah alone. I am unto you from him a warner and a bringer. Now, which way is it? You know?
Now, if I understand it
correctly,
which one is Muhammad? Yeah, exactly. And Stops, if I understand it, the corpus is the word for word translation. Translation.
You can click on the roots. You see the number. You see the channel, the chapter, and then you see 10 roots. If you click on that, yeah, that one, then you will see really. This is really word by word.
Okay, right. So then you see.
But go to number 3. Go to number 3 and think of it how Muhammad is saying it right here, and then verse number 3 actually says, he's cutting in and out from Allah and himself. It's really weird. But if you turn away, then indeed I fear for you the punishment of a great day. Now, here's the problem. If this is Muhammad speaking about himself, that kind of makes sense. But why would Allah fear for you on the day of resurrection?
Well, it could be seen as a threat.
Because Allah is not supposed to. Yeah, Allah is not supposed to have fear, right? But you can seek forgiveness of your Lord and repent to him. So this is all him, right? Muhammad allegedly, but it never says that it's saying from Muhammad. It's speaking as Allah.
Okay, but here you can say, I fear for you. This could be something. Listen, just make sure that you don't do that, because otherwise I'm afraid that you're going to get this. So this could be a figure of speech.
Yeah, they could argue that, Stops, I guess, but yes, taken in context with God knowing everything that's going to happen.
No, absolutely, I agree. No, I'm playing devil's advocate here.
I agree with you.
Say.
Yeah, I agree with you. That would be one argument that a Muslim could attempt to do, but then one could always ask, does Allah know everything that's going to happen, and could that ever change? And the answer is no. So why would fear come up if you know what's going to happen? How could how does it make any rational sense to fear something that you already know will happen? Especially if you are, an all-powerful, all-knowing God. I mean, you and I, even if I knew tomorrow that I was going to, go to hospital for an operation and I might not survive, I could be in fear because I'm just a fallible being. But, that sort of logic doesn't seem to, translate to Allah. There's no point in, he could, again, if he's all powerful, he could have fear, or he could experience fear if he chose to. I don't think anybody would argue that he couldn't choose to. I suppose the theistic argument would be that he just doesn't choose to. But I think you're right. It's a case of, if he does believe everything or know everything, then fearing something doesn't seem to fit with an all-knowing God.
Absolutely.
Poor answer. He's slugging away there. Listen, guys, if you want to talk about anything in Islam, you're welcome to join here. Don't let it out in the chat on one person. Come on here. Bring up your case. Bring your story if you are truthful. Just present it here instead of writing away in the chat and bringing up nonsense. Come on, guys. Don't be such cowards.
You're welcome to join here. Stops as said. You're welcome if you're a Muslim, especially if you've got anything to say. Obviously, the panel here is critics of Islam, and we've given our views. We've given some responses that we think Muslims could give. And again, there may be others. So guys, if there is, before we finish off on the topic, so if there's anything that comes to mind from yourselves as to other possible responses, whether you think it's good or not is irrelevant. I just want the audience to hear what other responses Muslims could give in response to, the Shirk argument against Allah. So if there's anything else, let me know. But as I say, if you want to say anything there, if you are a Muslim and you're in the chat and you, for some reason, either are a little, cautious of coming on here, or you can't for whatever reason, don't have the technology, and you have got an argument as to what you would say in response, please type that in, and we will, by all means, read it out to the audience. So if you're a Muslim and you have a response to the Shirk argument, then type it in if you don't want to join us. But ideally, we'd love to have you on the show. And
I heard a Muslim chat where stop was destroyed. I hope you're not talking about the earlier this week.
Well, we're going to.
I'll talk about it later.
Yes, we're going to cover that. So,
but
again,
I love this topic of shirk. I love this, and it's so nice to have so many people, and then you have this constructive thing where everybody brings in something, somebody remembers something, and I love this. I love this brainstorming.
Yeah, I think it's great to have people on here with different ideas. We all look at things a bit differently, and we'll come with things, and we can bat that backwards and forwards. And again, I would love to have a regular Muslim, somebody like Reactionary, I think was his name, that joined you. Stops. Yes. We'll talk about that later. Somebody like
good.
that.
Yes, I like that.
That's rational, that'll put forward what he considers his strongest argument. And he seems to be, and again, I don't know him that well, but just from the little bit I've interacted and listened to him, he's the sort of person that will avoid fallacies and give his strongest argument. Now, obviously, we're unlikely to agree with it, but at least, that's the sort of, I would love to have a regular that he comes on every week, or, wherever he was. That would be my 2019 wish, if there was something that we can have a Muslim that we can interact with, that we can all sort of keep our calm with, and also that he can come in, or more than one if there is, and put forward the strongest arguments. We can really listen, hear it, let the audience hear it, and then we can have a backwards and forwards. And I think that would be my 2019 wish. So if there is anybody, and I've invited Reactionary, he may not have seen the message. I don't think he's read it yet, or anybody else. But I will say this, though, that Stops and I probably will have a chat to whoever wants to come on here as a regular beforehand. We'll have a few discussions, and we really will evaluate people, because what we don't want, and was on the panel that you were on, Stops, is people who are poor representatives, who use fallacies, who strawman people, that sort of stuff. And when it's pointed out, they just ignore it. That's not what we want. It just takes too much time to go and correct things that either honest or more educated Muslims won't engage in. We really want to get down to the brass tacks of it, rather than having to correct fallacies and all that sort of stuff.
And don't worry, who was this now? Samad Ahad. I will address what actually happened later. So if you want to stick around, you can stop doing what you're doing at the moment. We'll talk about it later.
So any other things from you guys before we close it off? Because I think there's some, as you say, there's plenty of verses here. Thank you, Thunderous, for that. We'll put it into the description as well. As you say, we've brought up a few verses here between the guys as well. And I'd love to hear Muslim responses to this.
And Rationalizer is working in the background nowadays. He doesn't want to go in the front anymore.
Oh, was that a question?
Just to nip this in the bud.
Comment from somebody in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, if there's no more responses or anything else there that we can, put forward for people, and if there's no Muslims that either want to put an argument in the chat or want to join us, then we can sort of move on. So I will again thank Thunderous for going through the laborious task of finding all the Shirk resources.
My pleasure.
And
no, thank you. And I like Hopsky, who's saying, "Are you going to answer me, or are you going to shirk off?"
Yes,
it's lovely.
Talk about this. We're going to talk about it pretty much now. So, and again, Samit, this response of running away, I think from my point of view, and others may prefer, and we all have our own view on things, this is really a juvenile response. This is the sort of thing that I would expect from schoolyard children about running away. Whenever I hear that
defend your dumb rock god. What the fuck are you talking about? That's crazy.
Well, let's move on to that then, I guess, Stops. Shall we? So we'll draw a line under the Shirk thing. I think we've shown some verses there, and we'd love to, as I say, hear any other Muslim responses, but it seems fairly clear-cut there, or they would need some sort of explanation as to why those are in the Hadiths and the Qur'an. So, cool. Let's draw a line under that. If there's any other questions that do come up, we can always come back to it. But let's just open it up to a wider discussion now on other topics. So if you have any other topics, then let us know. Otherwise, I'll hand over to you, Stops.
I don't want to make a big deal out of this. This is just something where I think that others can learn from the mistakes that we make. Okay, and I'm quite open, and I will say yes, I made a mistake. and I shouldn't have let myself get drawn into this. It's just something that happened. I should have been more aloof. So yeah, that's the way it works. Now, the number one thing is, Rob went and was in a discussion and he asked a question, and this question is something that I think we should ask every single time. It is the most important question that we can ask to any Muslim, ask to anybody who's an apologist, or it doesn't matter what. Every Muslim should be able to answer the question, can you bring any compelling evidence, number one, for the existence of gods, and number two, why we should believe that yours is the one that we should believe in, this, that this exists, that this is the God that is the one that we should be worshipping and the most important one. If you are unable to do that, then what is the point of you being a Muslim? And the funny thing is 99% of Muslims cannot do that. Now, in other countries, Muslims are not interested. They're not so dogmatic. They're not so, I don't know, integrated into this thing. And the funny thing is that I find that a lot of Muslims in the UK are more dogmatic, are more fundamental than Muslims that I know from the Middle East, for example. Now, what happened is we got on this on the show by this woman who I consider to be just evil, okay, just really vicious. And what happened is Rob asked the question, can any Muslim provide us with an answer? Can any Muslim provide us with an example? Can any Muslim help us out and give us something where we can say, this is worthwhile thinking about? And this is then when somebody, this Abdul Hayy or whatever, I mean, his limitation his limit of thinking is just bouncing a basketball. And that was all he could come up with, because he said first-hand opinion, first-hand experience, first-hand observation is the most important and is what establishes everything. Because he came up, I mean, we need to understand deductive reasoning, okay? Deductive reasoning means that you have a premise 2, 3, 4, 5 or whatever, and if these premises are correct, then the conclusion is automatically correct. Now, what he does is make it into a simplistic version where he says, my observation is that God exists. Do you have any better option? No, therefore God exists. Okay? Now, that is the most stupid thing that you could actually do. Because number one, personal opinion, the thing that the observation, the personal observation that we make is totally, utterly useless. Okay, I cannot judge, and I brought this up as an example so many times. We cannot judge speed. We cannot, I mean, we all know this example of a guy walking through a lecture hall, and then 100 students are being asked, was he wearing glasses, yes or no? 50% say yes, 50% say no. Was he wearing a backpack? 50% yes, 50% no. And this is the way that we know that personal observation is absolutely, totally useless. So we can't use that as a premise. We can't use this as the basis for an entire belief system. And that is what I try to explain to him, that his, what he calls knowledge, is epistemologically completely wrong. And this is where I should have left it. But I let myself get sucked in because there were 7 Muslims against me. And then that is, he never said that. Yes, come on, it's on video. You can listen to it. There's a video on this. You can see, you can listen to it. This is exactly what he did. This was his first premise. And then he says, do you have anything better? Well, then therefore God. And he says, as soon as you commit yourself to this with the first-hand, irrefutable, observational, whatever, if you accept that, then you're done. This is the proof of God. And
yeah, I think I've posted it in the chat there anyway, so the Hangout is available. I'm only about 2 hours in at the moment, and I sort of go a little faster. I play things normally. I can hear them and take it in at 1.5 times speed, so that gets me through it a bit quicker for those that are interested. I'll just give a view as well, because Stops and I talked about this, prior to starting the show today, and I think the way that Stops did it here, I think got bogged down. But I think you were right that we shouldn't have gone into that whole thing. Just agree that there is a premise that we can all agree on, which is our rational faculties and our acceptance of the external world. And if we start
with reality,
with those premises, then we have a foundation between us as atheists and yourselves as theists to ascertain what is true or likely to be true. And this whole thing with this first-hand evidence, again, you used language that I think they didn't really understand, and maybe we can get cleaner with the language. And they were using this first-hand sort of evidence. And I guess what he meant, and you did clarify if you listen to it, is testimonial evidence. And when you say it's useless, I guess, again, if we can make it sort of cleaner language, if somebody has a personal testimony or firsthand, has their own experience and they cannot verify it, we can't say that it didn't happen, as in we can't say for sure, but we can, and it depends on the nature of the claim. And this wasn't covered in this hangout. It depends on the nature of the claim. If I say I have a dog, or I saw a dog in my backyard run across the back. In fact, I'm in the country, so if I say I saw a sheep run across the hill in the backyard, and I tell you I live in the country and so forth, that's not a big claim. Those sort of things we know happen. I'm a reasonably reliable, reporter of information. You're likely to accept it as likely to be true. Is it proof or evidence? Not necessarily, but you're likely to accept. And I think that's where the whole sort of thing, because the way you were saying it is essentially, I'm guessing, similar to what I'm saying now, but the way you said it sort of confused them. And then you got onto this whole thing. Now, what would constitute evidence would be a video, somebody else's testimony. Multiple testimonies would be better than one, but we still wouldn't necessarily accept that, depending on, and this was never said as far as I can tell, or maybe I missed it, or you said it in a different way, or I haven't got to it yet because I'm only 2 hours in, depends on the nature of the claim. So when it's a mundane claim, we would generally accept first-hand testimony, quote unquote, from people. And in fact, the more people that saw the same thing for a mundane claim, as in a claim that we've seen or know about before, the better. But when it's what I would call an extraordinary claim, let's use UFO. Let's put out, forget about sort of any godly claim, but a UFO. I don't know how many in the panel here or viewing would accept testimony from 1,000 people. Would you accept as knowledge that a UFO exists because 1,000 people saw it? And I suspect none of us would. We would require a lot more evidence because it's an extraordinary claim. So I think that's also something to bring in. So I'm okay with somebody saying they have personal testimony. Is it a knowledge claim? No, it isn't necessarily a knowledge claim, because knowledge requires more. And you did say that, Stops. You did say knowledge is a subset of belief, which it is, certainly for propositional claims, and therefore you need more. In other words, knowledge is much more powerful or stronger or more certain than a belief, and you need more
exactly
things.
And I defined it, and I'm seeing the same thing here. This Samad guy is now saying Stop said observation is not important. That's not what I said. And this is what I was confronted with again and again, that I would say you cannot use a bouncing basketball as a scientific observational basis. And I said, what we need, for example, is, and then I went one level up and I said, if you, for example, take the speed of a car, you are not able to accurately assess the speed of the car. And therefore, you need a measurement, you need to measure the distance, you need to measure the time, and then you could accurately determine the speed the car is going. And that is what I gave as an example. And this is when I said that personal, observation, whatever your personal opinion, doesn't hold anything. You need to have some sort of measurement that at the end of the day, you are the one who is drawing the conclusion. The human brain is doing that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's where the language can be cleaner. Hey, your first-hand experience, your first-hand claim is not necessarily and possibly not knowledge. And I think that's the thing, because when you said it doesn't mean anything, that throws, I could see how that would throw people who don't know you or don't know how you speak. That could throw them off. What do you mean it doesn't mean anything? But I think the other thing where you and this guy talked past each other was where you were saying that first-hand knowledge is, no good or whatever. And I guess, again, if I use different language, first-hand knowledge, you can't necessarily claim first-hand experience, you can't necessarily claim as knowledge. But his claim, and you said, okay, so what we would accept is evidence, which is testable, verifiable. And his claim was, hey, but somebody, not necessarily you, somebody has to observe that. And I think that's where, again, he thought, you had made, you were agreeing with his point, and you were still talking about, you as in you, Stops, coming up with this all by yourself, and then you use the car example. And he actually made and again, you only think about these things afterwards. He said,
read the chat. This is exactly the same idiotic argument. This is the same thing. You just said it, and this idiot is now repeating it. You said you need to measure. You said you, dummy. That's first-hand testable evidence, dummy. No, that's exactly what you just explained, and he's repeating it. I can't believe it. Anyway, the point that Robert made, and this is the number one lesson we need to learn. Make a statement and then verify it. And this is what I forgot. I did not say, listen, can we find a common understanding? If you are saying first-hand testable evidence, are you talking about that? No. Are you saying this? And now we can start verifying and placing a foundation somewhere in the middle where we can both start talking about something. And this is something, and this was my mistake, because I should be the better person, because I'm educated, I know these things, and I know that I should have done that. And this is where I say, yep, mea culpa, maxima culpa, I should have done that. I did not do that. And Rob pointed this out to me today, and I said, that is what I was missing. I should have asked it and established a foundation somewhere in the middle. And that's it. And the whole thing would have been over.
Yeah, you wouldn't have got bogged down with that. Because
the second thing then, nobody was able to produce anything like an argument, because the only thing was presuppositionalism. That's it. So there was no argument that could be made. We had, well, you don't know how the universe came about. You don't have a purpose. One guy started preaching. So that was useless. Saying a lot without actually talking a lot without saying anything. That's stupid. Anyway, the second thing was then that I said, okay, the opposite then, because you can't bring anything. Then let me challenge you on something. How do you handle all the inconsistencies, the contradictions, and the mistakes in the Quran? And now something interesting happened, because now one guy just wanted to argue. And I initially shied away from that. I didn't really want that, because if I mention gravity, nobody's going to ask me to go and explain gravity. But because I'm talking about a mistake, which they don't like, they think that they can now ask me, well, show one, so that they can argue. Now, lesson number 2, if you're trying to make a point, don't get bogged down and don't go to the level of the pigeon that you're playing chess against. Don't worry, leave it. Don't get bogged down. If I'm talking about a mistake in the Quran and nobody knows about a mistake in the Quran, then it is not my ignorance, it's their ignorance. Because we know that there are mistakes in the Quran. I've demonstrated it 15 million times. I do not need to do it again. I should have left it the way I did it in the beginning, but then I had 7 Muslims telling me, yeah, that you need to, and I got sucked into this. I should have left it. I should have said, look, I'm not here to argue. I do not want to get to this level. I just want to understand how you handle the mistake. And what I see is you simply deny it. And that's all. And I should have left it right there. We should have changed the topic. But I got sucked in, and that was the mistake. And this is why it ended up in this slaughterhouse thing, which I did not enjoy one bit afterwards. So that's it. So this is the mistake, and this is the lesson that others can learn from the mistake that I made. So the number one thing is go and establish a common ground, a common platform that you can both argue from. And the second thing is don't get bogged down and don't get sucked in. You need to stick with what it is that you came there to talk about. Don't get sidetracked. Don't get sucked into the stupid stuff.
Okay, so this fellow Muslim guy is asking, Samir is saying, I've heard your show before. I don't agree how it is moderated. Are you willing to come on Sia's show? Yes, we were both on Sia's show. Unfortunately, I had to leave. So if you watch the show, I drop off sort of unexpectedly, only about halfway in. I had a family matter to deal with, so I couldn't come back on. So Stops was on for a good 3 hours plus. So yes, we will go back on there again. I'm quite happy here. And again, either I can keep quiet or Stops can. So you can deal with, so if you want to come on here, you're more than welcome. And only one person will have a conversation with you if that's better with you. But yes, we're prepared to come on there. But we'd also like Muslims to come on here. It was Stops with 6 or 7 Muslims. Here there's 3 of us. And Thunderous is a Christian anyway, so if we go towards the bigger arguments that are not pointing towards Islam specifically,
no, keep quiet. I don't have a problem with that.
Then he probably wouldn't engage with that. So if you want to come on here, we can ensure that you're not talked over to whatever degree. I mean, don't go into long monologues, and we'll keep it, civil and concise. But yes, we're prepared to come and see, and we have done, and we did do this week past. We're prepared to, and I've spoken to her. We will come on again. But again, if you think that you want the echo chamber where you're more happy with 7 Muslims versus 1 or 2 atheists or 1 or 2 non-Muslims or whatever the case is, then I do encourage you to change that around. We're prepared to come there. We're prepared to moderate here so that you get your opportunity to speak. So please, be consistent and allow it to go both ways.
Mm. And one thing I still need to explain, why I think Sia did a really, really bad job and why I think she's a hypocrite, and I really did not like what she was doing. 2 things. Number one, I said, okay, we have a mistake. For example, they came then with, there's a barrier in the water. I said, where's the barrier in the water? Well, it looks like it. I said, no, this is not the way it works. And I explained everything. I explained it and I said, well, do you have evidence to the contrary? No. Well, what do you have? Well, we have this, I said, the standard Zakir-Naik stuff about the Gibraltar Sill. Yes, that's what we have. I said, well, that's wrong. It's not there. And if you look at the diagram, you will see that the diagram itself says that it is wrong. So you are contradicting yourself here because there is no evidence for this. So let's go to and then what happened is Sia said, okay, you need to get out of here because I want to talk to the Muslims alone. So everybody has their last say. So everybody had the comment and they told me, I'm an arsehole, I'm an idiot, I'm a stupid, whatever, I'm deaf, dumb, blind, and I deserve what I should be getting, and my heart is sealed. And okay, I said, all right, cool. I mean, this is what these people think. All right, I'm pathetic with freedom of speech, so I need to be able to take it, not only dish out, but I also need to receive it. And I sat there patiently listening to these people tell me what an asshole I am. Cool. Then I left. But now what happened, and this is what I think is so terrible, now they started to unload on me. What an asshole Takia was, that he did not take their side. And Takia, I love him to bits for what he said because he stayed objective. He said, look, yes, I believe that there's a God, but what you are doing is wrong. And this is why. And he showed it exactly. And this is something I appreciate immensely, that somebody can do that. And then what she said is, well, everything that he has said has been refuted, like the barrier in the seas was refuted. No, it was not. This is like a blatant lie. I don't understand how anybody can do that. There was no evidence presented. I said whatever you have is actually wrong. And if you cannot present the evidence, it stays wrong. It doesn't work like that. So nobody was able to do anything. And yet she said everything that he said was refuted when nothing was refuted. But because now they were only in the Muslim environment where I was not there anymore, they were now allowed to say what they wanted. And this is exactly what Rob just mentioned, the chamber, the echo chamber that they need. And that's it. And that's why I think this is really appalling and a really bad job what they did on Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever.
So one of the things, again, that I'll say for Stops, because Stops has done this such a lot, one of the things, Stops, I think, as a person listening to you, that you forget that could be better for viewers. I think that's the main thing, is for the viewers, is to go into an explanation or bring up, if you're on your computer, bring up something you can share screen, because you say things so fast as if it's a given, and in your head it's a given. Anybody who's listening, and especially somebody who's going to be skeptical of anything that you say, like with the barrier, you said, oh no, it's that Zakir-Naik stuff that's been refuted. No Muslim, as far as I can tell, would ever go, okay, Stops, do you know what? You've said it. It must be the case. I'm now going to stop doing that. So what I would like to see is go into the evidence if you have the ability. Obviously, if you're on your phone, you can't do that. But you say it so quickly as it's a matter of fact, which obviously in your mind you believe, but obviously no Muslim believes it, and I think the viewers want to see it. So maybe that's one thing, if you're able to, because I do know you just say it so fast because you've done it so many times and so on. But it's, again, maybe catching yourself and go, hang on a moment, let's pretend I'm speaking to people who have never heard about this before. I need to go through it, because me just saying it's the case is not going to convince anybody, especially any skeptic.
Okay, this is where my premise is different. I'm saying we're on the internet. We're in the 21st century. Before I open my mouth, I go and investigate it. If I do not know what on earth I'm talking about, then I don't open my mouth. And this is the problem. They go and they say there's a barrier in the oceans or between the seas or whatever, when there isn't. Now, have they ever gone and investigated this? No. Have they ever watched my video that I made on this where I demonstrate that this is wrong? No. Why not? So I'm saying we are living in the 21st century and they should have done it. And they did not. And this is their failing and not mine. So they should go and do that. They bloody well should go the homework before they go and accuse me of saying so. I agree with you that the people are lazy. I've seen this. They call atheists all sorts of things, and they don't even know the difference between belief and knowledge. They don't, like when you said, well, I am agnostic towards this. They only hear the word agnostic and they jump to all sorts of conclusions because they don't understand it. So I cannot go and assume that you are some stupid idiot living in the 7th century. I assume that you are a sentient human being living in the 21st and that you have looked at these things and you should know better. So maybe this is my biggest mistake.
Yeah, I think it is, to be honest. I think assuming that they should know better or that they're going to do the homework to refute themselves, I think is not an approach that's ever going to work. It's not, because again, if we, I mean, we would potentially look at the arguments, and I like looking at but we can't assume that everybody's going to do that. And I think you're right. That's probably the thing to notice, and not assume that they should or have or will have looked at your videos or looked at any refutations. They believe it to be true. Obviously, their premise is the Quran is in fact irrefutable. It's inerrant, and every other, philosophical word. So that's the premise they're coming from, and they're not going to look. Well, some of them might, but most of them are not, and they're never going to go look at your video specifically. And they're going to repeat.
But embryology has been refuted so comprehensively. How can anybody come to me and say, "Yeah, but Dr. Moore says it's a leech"? That is like it. I pull my hair out, because it has been refuted so many millions of times. If you read about embryology on the internet, you have to come across Much Ado About Nothing, which completely annihilates this. You can't miss it. If you enter embryology and more, you do come across that thing. And that's it. So this is where I get very angry. Yes, I did lose my cool, because for me, this is stupid. This is childish. This is ignorance, willful ignorance. And that's where I get angry with willful ignorance.
I think the only challenge with that stops is that people are not going to have looked this up, and very likely will resist looking it up if in fact it's challenges. Now, I don't think that's intellectually honest, but again, if that's the sort of audience that we are on occasions, or more often than not, going to encounter, then it's something to get used to, or go, okay, I know that's the sort of audience. I get pissed off. I'm not going to come on. Because coming on and getting upset, I don't think helps your blood pressure, and certainly doesn't convince anybody else. So I guess it's a case of going, okay, they've never heard this before. And I agree with you. If you care about these arguments, and if you want to, strengthen your own worldview, you would have looked at this. You would have looked at some of the refutations and go, oh yeah, I've seen that, but here's why I think that's wrong, or that's wrong because here's what was said, but I don't agree with this. Then now you could have that conversation, because the person has at least gone to look at it. And we've got somebody in here. We've actually got the gentleman who was in here. So Abdul, if you want to join us, I can do that. If you're on Hangouts, I can personally send you the link, and we can discuss it, because I'm also here. And obviously I heard what you said, and maybe we can, if Stops wants to, we can revisit that, because I will perhaps use different words to Stops and see whether we get anywhere or not. But you're more than welcome, or anybody else for that matter. Obviously we came on your show. You're now welcome to come on our show. And I think, that's one way that we can demonstrate we can do things together. We can come on your show. It's overwhelmingly Muslim, and you can come on here, and it's not really overwhelmingly non-Muslim. There's only 3 of us here, but it would be if you're the only one. So, and you're welcome to bring 1 or 2 other people. But there are a few people that, as I say, I probably wouldn't want to have on, like Hassan and those sort of people, because there's so many fallacies. I mean, if you go and listen to it, and he sort of started off, and he went into 15 different things, and virtually all of them were wrong. They were assumptions. They were not. He's not steel manning. In other words, he's not representing atheism or atheistic views accurately at all. And then he went into the Christian thing, which I think is, again, particularly egregious, claiming, and I did hear that part, and that's why I'm put off with somebody like that God was a baby, that God wet his nappy, that somebody carried God, as if this is a strong and a steel man argument of Christianity. I mean, that sort of thing, that's where I actually get a little bit annoyed. And you can explain this to somebody like that, they will go back and do it again. So that's where I think that, disingenuousness comes in, because I could always say, hey, that originator of all the bombers in the world, this guy that heard a voice in the cave, this pedophile, I could just use all of this and try and strawman or come up with the worst possible interpretation of Islam that I possibly could, and keep saying that. How many Muslims are going to say that that's an honest representation? So even though I don't think Christianity is true, when I hear stuff like, hey, he was a baby, he pooped in his pants, God pooped in his pants, this for me is absolutely juvenile. And when it's pointed out and you continue to do it, you're now disingenuous and you're misrepresenting arguments. And I don't want you on the show, because it's just, we can't even get to an argument.
Abdul says, and I'm surprised, he does have the balls to come here. Go for it. I don't know, how do you want the link?
I'll look on the show that you were on, if I can find it. It's
on CR Live.
Yes, I'm trying to find that one, because I dropped off. So hopefully I can find it here in a moment. I'll bring him on. I just want to see if I can find him here, and we can have that discussion. Abdul, if you're listening, can you just send me a message, because I can't see you here. We were on the Hangout. If you could just send me a message in Hangouts, I will see it pop up, and then I can give you a link. I don't want to share it here, otherwise we have trolls, and then it just descends. The Hangout goes all over the show. So I don't want to put the link live into the chat. But if we can just hook up, or maybe I can just ask. There we go. Oh, he's just left the chat. Is that the same guy? I'm not sure. I'm looking for Abdul. If you are in one of the Hangouts with us, then just drop me a message, hey Rob, or whatever, so I can see you, and then I will provide you the link as a private link through Google Hangouts, and you can join us. Or alternatively, Abdul, if you can post in the chat your email, I will invite you via email, and I think you can come in via email. Yep, I'm pretty sure you can. So that's another option. So just, we'll continue to chat for a moment here, but if you can just get hold of me.
Can you guys hear me properly? Is this
that's coming through better.
A better microphone than the previous weeks?
Yes, because the other one sort of cuts in and out. It's like it sounds like
yes.
You sent me the link and I cut and pasted it, emailed it to myself. I'm now using the laptop, so this is obviously the way to go forward for me then.
Well done, excellent. I'm proud of you, lad.
I am. I puffed out my chest in and now I'm happy.
But if anybody has a problem, come on. I mean, we are available. We now over Christmas, I'm ready. If I'm not dragging my, the others through the Christmas market, if anybody wants to test something, no problem. Always hit us up. Always glad to help.
Another thing, just for those who are on the phone, here's something I've realized. If you're on an iOS phone, if you're on a phone and you are wanting to join Hangouts, and you are given a link in virtually any program I've used, so if somebody gives it to you on Facebook, or they give it to you other than in Google Hangouts itself, what you need to do is copy the link, go to your Apple email, and email it to yourself. And when you click on the link in your own email that you've emailed to yourself, the link will then open into Hangouts. If you copy the link anywhere else, then it goes to Google Chrome on your phone, or it goes even to Safari and says, sorry, the link doesn't work. So you've got to email it to yourself. You've got to have Hangouts app on your phone. And then when you email it to yourself, it will open up into Hangouts. That's the only way I've found currently to get the Hangout link on my mobile phone to actually open into Google Hangouts app. So just be aware of that. Cool. Somebody's asking here, what is your guys' position on the existence of God? Sorry, this might be a very naive question that you've already answered many times. Thanks. So I think Stops and I are fairly similar. Thunderous's position is he's a Christian, so he believes in the Christian God and Jesus as his savior. As his son and savior for mankind. So myself and Stops, well, I won't speak for Stops. He can say it in his own words. I do not believe a God exists, or certainly the Abrahamic or any other God that is, quote, supernatural. So I'm sort of the positive atheist. I do not believe it. I don't lack a belief. I don't, in my view, having listened to the philosophers and others that have made that argument, I know there's a disagreement in the atheist world on this particular point. I'm on the side that I do not believe. It's not that I lack a belief. I do not believe, and I could give you some reasons why, depending on the sort of God. again, Stops might have a slightly different view. So,
No, well, I just say there's no good reason to believe it, so I don't.
yeah. I mean, similar to kind of what I've said, but I think Stops is not quite so strong in the sense like he won't say, I don't believe, although you kind of said that, but you
I
sort
do.
of.
No, I'm yes, I'm a 7.5.
Okay, so then, yes, okay, so you do not believe it, but again, there's a difference, and hopefully we'll get Abdul on here.
And I argue my case. I've made a video, gods don't exist, and here's why. So I put it in a video, I've put it down, it's documented, it's there.
Yeah, so there's two big sort of categories, really. The one is the general arguments that both Christians and Muslims and potentially some Jews that believe in the Torah might argue. So the Abrahamic gods would have the bigger arguments, let's say the philosophical or the scientific arguments. And then you go down to the specific arguments for the particular god based on the scriptures that particular god has either revealed or dictated to his or her followers. Well, his, I guess, if you're going to go with the normal scriptures. So those are the two big overarching categories normally when we're having evidential arguments. And then on rare occasions, you might find presuppositionists, those people who don't argue from evidence. They try and argue with a logical claim that in order even to make a rational argument, God must exist, and they try to argue that view. And if you haven't heard it before, it is easy to get stumped with that. Having listened to people way smarter than me, I'm not that smart, so it's that's why I love listening to much smarter people and more knowledgeable. Well, I've got Stops on here for many of the things, and Thunderous as well, because Thunderous and Takia and others, obviously we disagree, but they come with the strong arguments. They don't bring any fallacies, or if there's any picked up, they'll have a look at it. They might reformulate it, and the same for us, and they'll challenge us on things. And I think that's the highest level of discussion we can have. And I'm wanting more Muslims like that as well, at the high level, where we don't have to correct basic fallacies that don't do anything and then just bog us down, where we can get onto, the more meaty things where we can really get into the nuance. And I think we need to appreciate nuance, because trying to try to broad brush things, I don't think is helpful.
Well, I go one step further, because I maintain that people have had a chance for the last 50,000 years to prove that gods exist, and they haven't. So now I think it's time that we stop this and say, look, we need to now admit it. There are no gods. And if by chance there really is one, well, then you need to bring the evidence, because until that happens, I am not going to move 1 millimeter from my position, because for 50,000 years, people have claimed that there are gods, and nobody has managed to bring a shred of evidence in 50,000 years. So there is some sort of cutoff in my brain where I say, no, you've had enough now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously theists and particularly Christians, although the Muslims are, I think, to some degree borrowing those arguments, will claim that they've brought evidence and so forth. Obviously, these have been gone backwards and forwards, as you say, for thousands of years. And for most of the bigger philosophical points, there's no, from what I can tell anyway, no direct refutation that this is absolutely refuted. It's done. Again, we could argue the point, but when I listen to some professional philosophers, the bigger arguments at the very highest level of these discussions, and I go by these guys who are experts, Stephen Law, Professor John Schnook, and various other atheists, philosophers. These arguments have been rebutted. They've got strong rebuttals, whichever way you go, but very few of them are, from a philosopher's point of view, being refuted. Now, we as lay people can go, yeah, that's refuted, and that's fine. But generally, when I listen to the philosophers, they very seldom say an argument is refuted, but there are strong rebuttals. So they're much more, they couch their words a lot more than we do as lay people. We tend to be more loose with our words, whereas they, from what I can tell, are much more careful with it.
We've had philosophers on the show.
What's that?
We've had philosophers on the show, so we have plenty of opportunity to ask them.
Yes, and we will be having again in the new year, we'll be having Ozymandias Ramesses. Hopefully I'm in contact with him at the moment. He's going to come on and do a show about objective morality. So two things. One, he's going to put forward his view, which is very similar to Sam Harris, etc. And I'm going to give him plenty of time to articulate it, his view on objective morality from an atheist point of view. And he's also then going to critique objective morality from a theist or Christian or whatever, depending. I might ask him to do a couple of the different ones that he's heard. So that show won't be specifically about the Quran, but it will be more general, but it will point towards obviously Islam and Christianity. So he's going to do that. If you haven't heard him before, we've had him on twice before. Very articulate, very knowledgeable, And he, I think, among others, was one of the strongest people that came and I say rebutted, at least, if not refuted, the presuppositional argument. So we'll be looking forward to that in Jan.
So to answer the questions from the chat, yes, Allah does commit shirk. We've given plenty of examples, I think. Yes, we do allow other opinions. So I am not going to cut somebody off just because they do have a God belief. If somebody can argue their case, I don't have a problem. If somebody has a God belief, I don't have a problem with that. It's just when somebody forces or tries to force me to believe what they believe, that's when I get a little bit icky. The next thing is 50,000 years, there must be something to it. No, it just shows how weak this is, that even after 50,000 years of God claims, nothing has moved forward, nothing has happened. That is how bad it is.
I'm just sorry, I'm just typing into the chat here.
Atheism is a blind faith.
You see, women. That's kind of the the straw manning or the entire misrepresentation that I hear from the Muslim who said that Jesus was God, pooing his pants, as if that's going to be impressive to anybody who cares about a good argument. That sort of atheism is a blind faith claim, is both disingenuous and intellectually lazy. And that sort of person I probably wouldn't have on the show, because the time taken to try and correct them, and even if you did, they're very unlikely to accept it, because that sort of thinking, I think, needs more time to look into things. And I actually ask atheists what they believe and represent them accurately, because that whole
exist N1Z belief, God ain't. Yeah.
We've been chatting a lot. Thunderous, have you got any thoughts just generally on anything we've said and so forth? Go ahead.
No, nothing challenging really. You mentioned something earlier on about another guy that supports intelligent design as I do, but I don't want it to come across as though that if I was part of a panel and you guys were talking about the existence of God and such, that suddenly I would side as a default on the side of Islam just because there is something in comparison or something in common there. That wouldn't be the case. I'm on the panel, and I appreciate that I've got this privilege to come from a different perspective, one of experience, but one of also coming from the biblical narrative to challenge Islam. So if I am on the panel and you happen to discuss intelligent design per se with a Muslim, don't feel as though my default will be to side with the Islamic religion. I will be just as critical of any argument that they propose for intelligence, and particularly if it offends my intellect with the way that they're trying to present it.
Well, I appreciate that. I think if we can raise the level of the discussion with everybody, then we can really tackle the bigger different or the more nuanced differences, and perhaps the bigger ones, without having to waste a lot of time on correcting basic fallacies. So that's appreciated. Somebody is just asking in the chat there, Muhammad Hassan. Sorry, Muhammad. It's not Muhammad. I'm very bad with pronunciation. My apologies, Mr. Hassan. Great. Thank you for answering. So a follow-up question. If you don't believe in God, whereas Thunderous does, did you guys discuss about this disagreement? Yes, we have discussed this elsewhere on different platforms. Or is the show only about Islam? So yes, this show is a critique exclusively about Islam. So we will have Christians, we will have people of other faiths who are also critics of Islam. There are other shows that critique atheism or critique Christianity, etc. This show is exclusively critiquing Islam. So anyone who is an Islamic critic is welcome on here as a critic. And if they want to talk about their own beliefs, they can. We don't talk about their beliefs on the show because the show is focused on critiquing Islam. So there we go. Let's just see if there's...
Oh, by the way, if Abdul still wants to join, it's very easy. It's very open. Stop spamming. One is my Skype address. Just send me a message and I'll send you the link there. No problem. I mean, this shouldn't, keep us out of, we are in the 21st century, so there's very different ways of communicating with each other. So I don't think that this should be an obstacle.
Yes, I think.
Yeah, this channel needs better mods. Okay, are you applying? Don't worry, come on in, do the moderation. You're more than welcome to do so. If you can do it better, absolutely go ahead and do it.
Well, don't worry if you want to come on then, or if you could suggest what can be better. We're always open to hear that.
Channel needs fewer morons.
And if there's anybody
Wow, thank you.
I mean, we could have Thunderous as a mod here, because if they're challenging atheism, or if we're challenging Islam, and he could step back and just go, okay, I'm going to be a Christian for this. I know he's a critique of Islam. I would be okay with Thunderous, or Takia for that matter, being a moderator that could be objective to the best of their ability, and just listen to both sides and allow both people to speak. So I'm happy for somebody other than myself or Stops to actually moderate a discussion even on this show, so that we can have, if it needs to be the case that it appears more objective, then I'm happy to do that as well. Typically we have people on here though, and it becomes an open discussion. And Stops is working on, being a little bit more patient. Remember, he's been hearing these same arguments for 12 years. So perhaps once I've got to 12 years of hearing this, my patience may be a bit lower. But we all approach it in a different way, I think. And I think that Thunderous sometimes as well.
Did you hear that my statement was so badly misconstrued? Because now I non-stop studied Islam for 12 years, so I should be a Hakim or whatever. They don't understand that all I said is I've been looking at this for so long. I've studied Islam for so many. It's not that I have not done anything except study Islam, but this is how, these things happen. Just because I've got a scientific background doesn't mean that I am a professor, doctor, whatever. No, I'm not. I'm just somebody with a scientific background. I mean, there's nothing fancy about that.
Yeah, I think, again, it's sometimes the words, and I understand exactly what you mean because I know you and so forth, but other people misconstrue it. So when you say, I've studied Islam, they immediately think, which university did you go to? Where can we see your degree and that sort of stuff? And that's obviously not what you mean. So I guess it's, again, just looking and go, okay, how can I say this in a way that I'm speaking to people who have never heard me before and may misconstrue it? It's easy for us to say it here, but in the heat of the discussion, of course, we just speak as we normally do, and it's not easy. It's easy.
I can tell it's the Qatar Foundation, and it's Fanar. And another thing, I never, ever claimed that I was a Muslim. Never, not once. And I was not a Shia. Just because somebody has lived in Tehran does not mean I am from Iran. I always make 100% clear I went to school in Tehran. That's it. I was not born there. I'm not an ex-Shia. I'm not an ex-Muslim. I've never been any one of those things, and I am not Iranian. Okay, so I don't understand why people are still unsure about this and why it makes them feel better to make up stuff about me. I don't know why that helps them.
Yeah, I think as you know, Stops, we need to just get past that. People think I'm a racist policeman that beat up people in South Africa and all that sort of stuff. And I just sort of ignore that. And again, sometimes it's not helpful to share some of your history here because you have people who don't want to engage in the arguments. So it's much easier to, engage in an ad hominem. And by the way, again, just while I'm on the topic, people misconstrue an ad hominem. So again, for those who maybe are unsure or think they know what it is, to me, and I'm happy to be corrected, an ad hominem is where you attack a person's character instead of dealing with the argument. However, if you make an assessment of somebody based on what they've said, that is not an ad hominem. And an ad hominem is in place of an argument. So if I say, for example, that Hussein is not somebody that I think is useful to have a discussion with based on his
somebody I would call an asshole,
is because I've heard it and I've had a conversation. So that's my assessment of his position in regards to having a discussion. I think it's very poor. I'd rather have somebody like reaction. I'm looking for the best Muslims we can have rather than looking for ones that I have to correct 50 million things that are basic that every rational person and somebody who's being intellectually honest would never bring up. And so there's a difference with an ad hominem. If I just said he's an arsehole, when he said, hey, Rob, do you believe X, Y, and Z? And I said, oh, you're just an arsehole. That would, of course, mean that I'm using an ad hominem. But if I have to then go and correct everything and I then say, based on all of this, I think you misrepresent people's positions. You are being disingenuous, and therefore having a conversation with you, I don't think is fruitful because all this time is wasted and you are unlikely to change your mind. That wouldn't have been, that would not be an ad hominem. So I just want to make sure because people often mistake the two when you're critiquing somebody or assessing somebody based on what they've said and you're making an assessment. They could always challenge that, but when you're making an assessment, it's not an ad hominem.
And the same thing, if I say something that you don't like, that's not a straw man.
Yes, correct. So again, for people who don't know, straw man is not representing somebody's argument accurately. And one of the things I think we could all be better is asking this question: have I understood you correctly? Let me summarize what you've said to make sure I understand you correctly. Now, that's not always easy in a live discussion, especially if you're in a multi-panel. But on some occasions, I think it's useful, because then what you want the person, your ideal outcome is for that person to say, yes, that's pretty much what I've said. You've accurately, because once they've done that, then you know you've understood them, they know you've understood them, and then you can go forward. But if they have to say no, as Stops did countless times in that discussion where he felt he was misrepresented, then the panel goes nowhere, the discussion goes nowhere, because he keeps having to go back and correct what he thinks is incorrect. So again, I think, representing somebody accurately is intellectually honest. And if somebody keeps doing that, then at some point you go, okay, for me anyway, if somebody keeps doing that and you have to keep doing it, a great example is Darren Hamza in Speaker's Corner. If you watch a couple of the videos where he and Skydive Full had a discussion, the one that I videoed some year and a half back or whatever the case is, and then a couple more recently, you will hear Skydive Full say multiple times, that's not what I'm saying. Will you stop misrepresenting me? And this happens not once or twice, but 3 or 4 or 5 times, because the interlocutor is listening and then making an assumption that his opposite side is not agreeing with. So rather ask the question rather than, because Skydive Full will say, well, we don't know how the universe is beginning. Are you saying then you have no clue? No, that's not what we're saying. And so you have to correct it. What we're saying is we don't know. There's information on both sides of the discussion. That doesn't mean we know nothing about it. So that's sort of and when it continues and continues, then at some point you go, either this person is terrible in their comprehension and listening, or they're being willfully disingenuous. And at that point, then it's a case of, do I want to continue speaking to this person that continually misrepresents me? And like I said,
and we are not Zionist Jews either.
There's this other gentleman in the I don't know who he is, and maybe Stops, you can tell me what this means. Don't worry, said, I would have been a nice asset to this channel. I'm not a Muslim, but I live in KSA.
Yeah, I saw this, but I didn't.
I'm not sure what KSA is. Don't worry. So maybe you can tell us what that is. Again, you're welcome to come on the show, tell us who you are, what you believe, etc. And if you don't want to defend your position, if you just want to be a panelist on the show where you can bring a perspective or point out where you think we're being overly biased, you're welcome to come on the show and do that. So if you want to be sort of a moderator in some way, or sort of an influence that can point out where you think we're going too far, then I welcome that. So the offer is open to you, or in fact, anybody else. So you don't have to come on here and tell us your worldview necessarily, although that's helpful. I mean, this whole show is about critiquing Islam, and we want Muslims on here, and we want to have that discussion.
People here are extreme Nazis. I wonder if people who use the word Nazi know what a Nazi is. Like to make fun of my own faith too. So now and then, I believe God has humor too. Okay.
Okay. So Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Okay. So there we go. Thank you for that. Okay. So he's in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and he's not a Muslim. So presumably the corollary, the antithesis, is a non-Muslim. If you're not a Muslim, then you would be a non-Muslim of some sort, which could mean you're a Christian, you're a Hindu, you're an atheist, an agnostic, or something else. You're just not a Muslim, which is fair enough. So yes, I'm quite happy if you at some point want to join us. So on that note, I'm just seeing whether anybody else is here. It's just
and Abdul does not have Skype, does not have Hangouts, does not have any means of communicating.
Oh, have you got that? Okay, somebody else there, K Ferrari. I'm not sure. Oh, there's somebody, K Ferrari. I'm not sure who that is. Thanks for the offer. I was speaking to, don't worry, but again, K, I haven't seen a lot of your chat messages. Apologies there. So, but the offer is open if you are somebody like that as well and wants to join. Again, you could do it on your phone. You don't need a computer, as long as you have a phone and the audio from your phone is okay, and you have the Hangouts app. You can join us through Hangouts app on a mobile phone, Android or iOS as well. So, or a tablet if you have a tablet of some sort. So any device that connects you to the internet and allows you to connect to Google Hangouts, then you're welcome to join us. Cool, that's no problem. So maybe next week, he says. Yeah, no problem.
Great, yeah.
So are you saying that Abdul doesn't have any method of communication?
Well, I offered my Skype. You offered Hangouts. I don't know what other means. What can we offer other than that?
Yeah. So again, if anybody wants to join because we're pretty much at the end. I'm not sure if there's anything. Oh, there was that other thing. Do you want to cover that still?
Which one is that?
One of our fellow atheists that we had a disagreement with. Did you still want to cover that?
Oh, well, I don't know if it's worth even mentioning that we are now seeing this huge ripple effect where, okay, I maintain that it is down to the safe space demands made by Muslims, where they said, we don't want to be criticized. We don't want to be at the blunt end of any kind of criticism or any kind of investigation. You're not allowed to talk about Islam. You're not allowed to look at it. And least of all, are you allowed to in any way say something negative about Muhammad. So if anybody did that, it had repercussions. I mean, I've lost, I don't know how many channels simply, and this is the funny thing, for quoting hadiths which are being deemed as authentic by Islam scholars. And now what is happening is a lot of people have said, well, because we have safe spaces, we're not allowed to say these things anymore. We're not allowed to criticize people, because not only is it the Muslims who need a safe space, but it's also anybody with LGBT or anybody who has a snowflake issue who needs special protection, needs to somehow have their own protected space so that you're not allowed to talk to them anymore. And this now has led social media platforms to be engaged in litigation. And this is the crazy thing. It is now going into the legal realm, where lawyers are now going and saying, you need to delete this because you are now not only criticizing somebody who is saying something stupid, but you're saying this because they have, I don't know, identifier X, because they have blue eyes or blonde hair or something, and you're not allowed to use that. You're not allowed to address this. If you are mentioning this, you are now liable for prosecution. And now, because this is being abused by lawyers, because they're making a shithouse full of money on this now, social media platforms have started shutting everything down. This happened with YouTube, where in a year ago, they started demonetizing everybody who was in the least bit controversial, because the advertising revenue was going down, because any company who is selling crisps doesn't want to advertise next to somebody who talks about the dangers of fat or oils or whatever. So they don't accept anybody talking about health issues and blah, blah. So this is a whole thing. So what has happened now is that Twitter followed, and then entire news channels were shut down if they were producing something controversial. So if you were not part of the mainframe or the mainstream, you were out. And now what is happening is we have people who normally are on board with saying something negative or something, then all of a sudden they are being shut down. And now we have somebody where I've been working together with him, and I've had a very good relationship with him. But now, because of this issue with free speech, and because of the issue that I maintain, and I'm passionate about this, that we should have absolute free speech, he doesn't talk to me anymore. He's blocked me on FaceTube. On Facebook. So it's getting really crazy that this free speech issue, this censorship, and this requirement and this demand by some people that we don't talk about certain things anymore is really going crazy. So now people like on Patreon, where a lot of people have got some income because it enabled others to show their appreciation, not only in thumbs up but actually in monetary values, have been deplatformed. I mean, what a stupid word. Have been kicked out because they were saying something controversial. And what has happened is somebody like Sargon of Akkad said something, I don't know, somewhere on the street, he mentioned some word, somebody hears this, and therefore he is now chucked off Patreon because Patreon says, well, we have in our rules and regulations, we're a private company, we have in our rules, you're not allowed to say anything against any race. Yeah, but hang on. He's talking about something completely different in a totally different area, in a totally different space, in a totally different context, in a totally different everything, which does not apply to Patreon. So if Patreon has rules where you're not allowed to wear an eye patch if you come to work, that's cool. But if I'm in the street, I'm sitting in my car wearing an eye patch, there is no such thing that they should then go and say, well, you're not allowed to come into our platform just because you're wearing an eye patch when you're driving in your car. That's crazy. And this is where I am saying we have absolute free speech. We have a right to absolute free speech. We have defamation laws which handle everything that shouldn't be done, that shouldn't be said, which damages people. But other than that, words do not kill. There is no immediate effect. Yes, there are consequences. Yes, you can feel hurt. But then I maintain we are in the 21st century and we should have the balls to handle it. But now it is the consequences are that I am losing people that I thought were rational and I got along with very well. And all of a sudden they're saying, yeah, but you're not allowed to say this. No, we're not. That's crazy. That is crazy. And then protecting themselves and hiding behind, yeah, but it's in the terms and conditions. If you don't like it, lump it. Sure, but if this is being abused, it doesn't work. And this is why I'm so angry about this, because I maintain that we have free speech. I accept if this is a private company that they can curb this and they make their own rules and regulations. That's cool. But you can't go and have one company say, I heard you somewhere else say something and that's why I'm kicking you out of mine because I have not violated their terms and conditions. That's how easy it is. Thank you.
Let me just add to what Stops has said there so that people who have not heard about this get the sort of story. So recently in the last week, 2 weeks, whatever it is, very recently, Sargon Avocado, who's a YouTuber, has got, had about 1 million plus subscribers, and, with the YouTube pruning everybody's accounts for inactive subscribers, everybody's subscriber count drops down a little bit. So he's that down. When I had a look, it was about 890,000 subscribers. He's been on Patreon, which is a crowdfunding source, so where you have a lot of patrons that pay you X amount per week or per video or per month, and you have an income so that you can then be essentially a professional YouTuber. And so he's been on that platform for about 4 years, and has slowly built up his subscribers and Patreon, should I say, that pay him X amount of money a month. I don't know if his was open. I thought it was open at one point. It was well in excess of £10,000 a month. So he had a fair amount of subscribers and a reasonable income coming in. And so what happened was he used the N-word. We have to say the N-word in case somebody tries to challenge us on this particular stream, which I'm not in favor of limiting speech, as I say, but I'm only doing it here so that we don't have this, hangout in any way flagged up. So he said the N-word about 10 months ago on another platform where he was engaging with white supremacists. And he used the word as a derogatory term towards the white supremacists. He said, you white N-word guys, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the information is out there. The hangout is, I think, still up. This has been quoted. There's no secret. So he used this 10 months ago on a platform, on somebody else's show, not his own, nothing to do with Patreon, where he used this word, which most people suggest that he could have used a different word, but he was free to use it on this platform, and it was derogatory towards white supremacists. Subsequently, then the Trust and Safety Council, in inverted commas, on Patreon banned him immediately. There was no warning. There was nothing. He woke up. The account was terminated. Boom, done. He then appealed this. There was no response. Now, the Trust and Safety Commission eventually came back and said that he was banned for violating their terms of service. Now, when you look at the terms of service, at no point does it say that you can be banned for things you said elsewhere years ago, not on their platform. And in fact, the founder of Patreon, Jack Conte, was in an interview with Dave Rubin. Again, this is all online. And Sargon Avocado has documented this anyway. You can see it there. He says, no, we will never, it's hate speech on our platform. So our terms and conditions refer to our platform. And so a couple of issues here that I take issue with. A private company can terminate anybody if they if they violate the company's terms and conditions. What this company did that everybody feels is unethical, and Sam Harris has closed his account there, and so have a number of other. Sam Harris was the 13th highest grossing Patreon, and even people who are higher than that have signaled their view that they're going to leave the platform. But the reason that it's so egregious is not because he used this word and not because he was summarily banned. It was because it was on a different platform. There was no warning about this. This happened 10 months ago. And other people on the opposite spectrum, because Sargon of Akkad, says he's liberal, but when you listen to him, most people think he's sort of more towards the right now, which other liberals have done as well, because so many people on the left have gone so far left that people who were traditionally left are almost seen as right-wing or on the right side of the spectrum. But the other thing is that people on the left side, so Antifa-type people, have had threats. There were podcasts. If you listen to a guy called Timcast, Timcast, he's documented a lot of this as well. And there are other shows, podcasts that are actually on Patreon. This is not even off Patreon, who use derogatory terms, who are violating and continue to violate these terms of service, and they have not been banned. So there's a great deal of information here. It's not a fact of, hey, we're just disagreeing with this. Nothing. That's why the fellow atheist that Stops and I are chatting about, we found this so egregious, because he's such a good atheist, and I still recommend him for his critique of some Christians and some Muslims. But what I felt now, and we won't go into, we've got screenshots of all the conversation, but essentially he's now arguing as if he was a theist, and I don't want to paint all theists with the same brush. So he's more arguing like a Muslim that he's been very critical of in the past, saying, hey, these basically on the lines of that these Nazis, aka Sargon of Akkad and Milo Yiannopoulos, who's a provocateur, he's lumping the two of them together, but B, that they are Nazis, and this sort of speech has violent consequences, or I don't think he actually used the word violent consequences, but the inference is that what they say will lead to violence, and this cannot be allowed, and Patreon is entirely justified in doing this. And when I very politely, myself firstly, and then Stops, challenged this, we were summarily blocked. And I think that was the very disappointing part of this, because this is somebody that people will know about, and is somebody who otherwise is very sharp with his thinking, his research, and so forth. And I have respect for him on this, and it's very disappointing that it seems to us anyway that it's now complete inversion, because his thinking on this is pretty much the same as if he was talking about one of the Muslims that he challenges, as Stops has said. So yeah. Muslim, hey, we can't criticize Muhammad. His version is, these people are Nazis and they should not be allowed. And Patreon is absolutely right. And anybody that says or challenges that, we're entirely wrong, and we've got the wrong end of the stick, and we just cannot be spoken to, and we've been blocked, which has been, as I say, very disappointing.
Yeah. And please, do we have the right to make anti-Semitic remarks?
Is that a question in the chat?
Is the question from the chat? What reason would there be that we would not have the right to make anti-Semitic remarks? Does anybody require a special protective package or an area that we're not allowed to talk about? Of course we should be able to do that. And what is an anti-Semitic remark? If I tell the Jews, listen, you are deluded, is that an anti-Semitic remark? Sure, according to some people it is. If I tell a Jew that your God is one of the most brutal, narcissistic, idiotic gods there is on this planet, am I being anti-Semitic? I don't know. I don't think I am. But to some people, I'm sure that I am. But it's not, I cannot look into the heads of every single person and know whether they are now going to decide that they are going to feel offended. I don't have this ability. So I'm saying something which is my personal opinion, and I should be able to see this. I should be able to say this. I should be able to voice my opinion. If I see somebody and I say that they are behaving in a wrong way, I should be able to say this. And I don't care whether they're Jews or Muslims or blonde-haired. I don't care. I shouldn't have to care, because I cannot look into their heads to see what is going to offend them.
I think, to echo what Stop said on the broader point, my personal view is no, anti-Semitism shouldn't be hate speech, and I don't believe in hate speech anyway, and I don't think Jews per se should have any special treatment over any other group. Often I hear the argument, hey, Jews are not the same as Islam because Islam is an ideology and Jews are a race. That point is true, but I don't think that Jews deserve a special treatment with anti-Semitism. And you can always point back to World War II, but that's because then if that's what you're going to do, then other people can rightly point back to slavery and to any other thing that they feel that their group has been disadvantaged or severely injured in some way, then they should have the same thing. So I do say that, some of the Jewish sort of organizations like the Anti-Defamation League have been very successful in lobbying to have this sort of thing shut down. So on the one side, you have, the CARE group in the US, the I can't remember what it stands for, CAIR, who are lobbying to prevent, having speech, certain things said. And on the other hand, you have the ADF, Anti-Defamation League, who's looking for anti-Semitism everywhere. And I think that, speech, as Stops has said, apart from direct incitement to violence, anything should be said and we should critique them. So where these people should pay a penalty is a social penalty, A, that we can critique with facts, and B, if, for example, their employer or somebody finds out, I wouldn't want to have an anti-Semite or an anti-Muslim bigot working for me or anything like that. So that's where you could pay a social penalty. What we're talking about is there should be no sanction from a legal perspective.
And show me, I get worked up because I'm passionate about this. For me, free speech is one of the cornerstones of democracy. And for me, free speech is one of the most important things in our society today. If we lose that, we lose our entire society. I'm sorry if I sound dramatic, but in my eyes, that's what it amounts to. So I'm very passionate about free speech. I'm very passionate about being able to voice my opinion because I have lived in countries where I was not allowed to do so. And I thought it's appalling. And that is why I'm getting worked up about this. And the N word is Nutella, absolutely.
Andres, your thoughts on some of these things? Stops and I have been sort of going on a bit. Anything you want to add?
When it comes to free speech, I can't really add any more to what Stops has said. My thoughts are entirely with Stops on that. I think Voltaire once said, "I hate what you say, but I defend your right to say it."
Yes, exactly.
And to be honest with you, when you start curbing free speech in any kind of avenue or any pretext, you're chaperoning dialogue. And I think the alarming thing for me, or what's taking precedence, is when the Islamic religion is gaining traction with curbing people's dialogue because it's pseudo offense. Yet the Quran seems to be allowed to manifest its manifesto with impunity. I'll give an example. You were saying that you quoted some hadith. So you're quoting hadith and you've had your channel blocked. And yet you can quote the Quran and have your channel blocked, but nobody wants to block the Quran. And yet when you consider dialogue, I will challenge anybody, please find me a piece of literature where the vitriol manifesto and ideology is more evil than the Quran itself. It is the most racist, sexist, misogynistic, prejudiced piece of literature out there. And I'll put up or shut up to anybody who says otherwise. And yet the Quran seems to behave with impunity in society, and nobody seems to want to touch it or challenge it. And yet, this, I think, something you did, was it yourself, Rob? You put something up, and I think my response was, truth has now become hate speech. And that's the world that we live in. Having an opinion is now offensive. Voicing your opinion is now either homophobic or Islamophobic or anti-Semitic or racist. You're a hate monger. You're a bigot. The insults are already prepared to marginalize and curtail anybody to have a thought or an opinion or to voice any kind of criticism of anything out there now. this is not the world I grew up in. I'm 50. I remember the days in the 70s when my dad, being of Persian descent, and working with people that are Asian, Pakistani, Indian, and the Afro-Caribbean community, coming home and laughing amongst themselves about things like Love Thy Neighbor or Mind Your Language, comedy shows that ran into, say, 2, 3, or 4 seasons of series. You wouldn't dare show one of those episodes now on TV. You wouldn't be able to get Alf Garnett on television now with I don't know if you're familiar with these programs, Till Death Us Do Part, because they would be considered offensive and obscene. Yet the reality,
Yes. Think about the ads in the 50s.
those programs, if you was to look at them, the accuracy with which they portray those cultures and colors and religions, it was almost prophetic. And yet the blacks and the Asians and that did not find those programs offensive in the slightest. That's why they loved them. And we're living in a society now where I don't know where this has all started. I have ideas, but I don't want to say what they are because I don't want to offend any of the listeners. I think it'd probably be one of those where we go into a private discussion where I'd voice those, where I personally see the tide started to change. But yeah, I would totally agree with you, Stops, that I'm not offended by words because that is merely all they are. It's just words. The ideology where there's a manifestation of an emotional content where you act upon that content is where the concern is, and you couldn't get a greater example than the Quran and Islam and the Muslim, and yet it behaves with impunity in every location Islam is found on the world scene, from Australia to New Zealand, all the way through the Middle East into Europe, all the way to the Americas and South America, and over and beyond into China. Nobody wants to say anything.
Obviously,
And the thing is, look at how many people object to certain words being used. So I always ask, well, where is this list? Where is this list of words of the English language that I'm not allowed to use? And who is the keeper of this list?
You know what, Stops? I had this discussion with a lady I once dated. And I said to her, I can call you, and forgive me, I'm going to use the words, if that's okay. I said, I could call you a cunt. I could call you a fanny. And all I'm doing is describing female genitalia. That is it. That is all the word. It's not a nice word, but when you use the word, that's all you're describing. It's a bit like when you call a man a prick, a dick, a cock. All you're describing is a penis. You're using slang to describe a penis. Yet people are offended by these words. Yet if I call somebody a liar, nobody's offended. Now I'll ask you, as intelligent, intellectual gentlemen, which is more offended? If I called you a cock, if I called you Stops a cock, and if I called you Robs a prick, right? Or I called you a liar, both of you liars, which one intellectually is the worse insult?
Liar, of course. Yeah.
You can call anybody a liar with impunity and nobody will be offended. If I call you a prick or a dick or a cunt or a cock, you will all of a sudden people come out of the woodwork saying you can't use that kind of terminology or language.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
I want to answer something else here that's kind of related in a way, because we did talk about it. Kay Ferrari says the Quran is interpretive according to your mindset. Lovers see love, haters see hate. The problem with that, Kay, is that there are, I don't think, and even Muslim apologists have got to do incredible acrobatics to suggest that everything in the Quran is love. And there are some verses that you just cannot reinterpret as if they were loving verses for non-Muslims. And I think that's the problem. Now, and you can point to other books, and sometimes that fallacious argument is made, hey, look at all these other books. This book is claimed to be the perfect, inerrant word of God that's complete, concise, and error-free, and for all people, for all time. And if that's the case, and you are claiming that this is an all-good God, then there's clearly a contradiction there. One reads the Quran. And if, in fact, you need such a huge mental leap to reinterpret some of these verses as if they were loving verses, then again, the author is clearly poorly putting across this message for all people. And I think, again, the most plausible, straightforward interpretation. If you look back, and my colleagues here are more learned than me, if you look back at old tafsirs and original quote unquote interpretations back closer to Muhammad's time, they follow much more closely the more straightforward interpretations that some people would now consider fundamentalist or whatever the case is. But those were the interpretations. Now, those have changed over time, and especially in the collision with the West, because there's this need to make Islam appear in some way compatible with the West. And nobody's claiming that there aren't good versions, and Stops read one at the beginning of the show. And that's part of the show now, is to read one good thing out of the Quran, because nobody's denying that there aren't good things. Just like nobody's denying in Mein Kampf, you can't go and find, some good passages. I haven't read the entire thing, but from what I remember, at some point Hitler says, and I think it's in Mein Kampf, I stand to be corrected, and I'm sure there's plenty of people here that can do that. The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. Now, that seems to be a true statement, and especially so at government and big institutional levels. So you can find some wisdom in any book. The difference is this book is claimed to have come from an omnibenevolent, omniscient, and omnipotent God. And in that case, we don't expect any negativity and hate. And if there is hate, then we have to question that. And that goes against an omnibenevolent God. So hopefully that answers that sort of query of yours.
Just to add on to that, I would say it's supposed to be a book made clear. So who's it made clear to? The one who reads it with love, or the one that reads it with hate?
Yes, exactly.
And that's the other thing, of course, it's my pet peeve with the Quran. Is it possible, and I ask this, and again, I don't often get straight answers. Occasionally I'll get a straight answer. Is it possible that God could have written the Quran more clearly and comprehensively and covered everything that the hadiths cover? Could that have been done? And of course, the obvious answer is yes, God could have done that. The one response I heard was, wow, this book would have been big. Well, hey, if this is God's word and he knows what's going to happen and so forth, I don't mind if it's 25 volumes. Somebody will read it. If not, more than one person will read this. And that would be a definitive guide, if not instructions, even if we were charitable and suggested it was a guide rather than instructions with terrible consequences for not following it, then yes, I expect the Quran to be more precise, more clear, and require zero interpretation. That's exactly what I would expect if the claim is that God has written this for all people, for all time, and people that are not, the highest level of scholarship can also read and understand, because clearly those people in different parts of the world will not have access to scholars and so forth. So surely this book is straightforward and simple enough for anybody with reasonable intelligence to be able to read, understand, and accept if it were true.
Yeah, and considering when there's a claim that there's 1.5 billion people who claim to be Muslim, you'd have to conclude on that at least 1.2, the greater majority, would be lacking education and access to the tafsirs or the information needed to understand the book made clear. And there would be, the majority of them will be living quite in an impoverished state. So I can't see how the book can be made clear to those people. And also, when I was going through it, it's just I don't want to go off subject here, but when I was going through the material with reference to does Allah commit shirk, when you read the surahs, it kind of reminded me again, because there are surahs there that in the commentary underneath, nobody knows. This is the miracle of the Quran. Nobody knows what these letters mean. The Alif, Mim, and Noon. And I've forgotten how repeated they are in the Quran. These are and all the commentaries on these are miracles of the Quran. Nobody knows what they mean. So yet again, it goes back to how can the book have so many letters and words in it that nobody means in a book that's supposed to be made clear and easy to understand? And where is the miracle in all of this? The miracle that nobody knows what they mean.
I mean, I have had some Muslims who have said to me, that there's still things to be found out. There's still some secrets in there. And again, that sort of goes contrary to as you've said, Thunderous, that goes contrary to the claim that this is a clear and concise book and it's meant for all people for all time. If the claim was that it was meant for 7th century or it requires scholarly interpretation, then fine. Then, those arguments wouldn't necessarily apply. But if that were the case, then of course the claim that everybody could read this or this was clear and people would be without excuse, that would fall away. So
Okay, but I would challenge that easily, because if you look at the biblical narrative, if you go to, I think it's at John 4:24, where it says, "No man can come to me except for the Father who sent me draws him." Or there's, I think it's in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 6 to 9, where it says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God kept making it grow. There are several verses in the Bible that show that God, with somebody's understanding of the Bible, God's Spirit is directing them, helping to understand, formulate what the answers are, or what the understanding are, what the deeper truths are. Whether you accept it or not, with the text, that's what they clearly point out. For people to understand in this period of time what Aleph, Mim, Nun, and all these words are, the only way that they can understand it is if Allah himself is directing them to understand. There is no other way of them to form a conclusion as to what the words mean, because it would be subjective. So somebody must be, if that's to be true with what you're saying, somebody must be directed by Allah to come to a conclusion as to what these letters and words mean.
yes,
There is no way they can come to that conclusion on their own. That because they will have had that. Did Muhammad know what those letters and words mean?
yes, you would expect Allah's apostle to know.
Exactly.
And
Sorry.
no worries. We've got Mahmoud with us now. Let me bring him in here. Good evening, Mahmoud. Thank you for joining us. He's joined. He was in the chat here. He asked for the link. So good evening, Mahmoud. If you unmute yourself, just let us know a little bit about yourself, and then share with us a few thoughts that you've had either on what we talked about as the main topic or any other topics. Go ahead. You just need to unmute yourself there. I can't do that.
Sorry.
There you go.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, good evening. I'll make you a bit louder. You're a little bit soft, so let me just make you a little bit louder there. Where are we?
I can turn up the volume in my computer as well. I just did. Does that help?
Yes, that's a little bit better. Yeah, good evening. Go ahead. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Are you Muslim, non-Muslim? And also, some thoughts on some of the, and a little bit, if you want to, a short bit of your story, if you wish. Otherwise, just let us know, some of the comments that you might want to share.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you for letting me in your show. I am actually, you can say, a fan of your show. I am in the West Coast of North America. And so when you guys start the show, it's kind of midday for me on a Friday. So usually on my lunchtime, I do tend to listen to you guys live. And sometimes when I cannot listen to your show live, I do it on the next morning or Friday night. It's been great listening to you. I've been listening to you for last 3 or 4 months. I wanted to join in one of your shows a couple of months ago, and I was almost all set before my manager quickly asked me to do something, so I had to go away. Yeah.
Sorry, are you Muslim or non-Muslim?
I was born a Muslim, but I am no longer a Muslim. So yeah, I can give you a little bit of background about myself.
Whatever you feel comfortable, because sometimes there's a concern with ex-Muslims about, some sort of repercussion. So just be aware of that and obviously share only what you feel comfortable with.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I will be brief and won't give much detail, just as much as is required to give my story. So I was born a Muslim. I was born in a very practicing family, and I was also very, very much into it. Used to pray 5 times a day, used to do all kinds of things in there. And then I was taught a lot of different myths about the religion, I would say myths and stories and all those fanciful stories. But I was never I never revisited those. And I am not an Arab, so the Islamic texts like the Qur'an or the Hadiths, those I really cannot read and understand myself. I can read Arabic, but just read the script, read it, but don't understand a thing out of it. So in my early life, I used to be a very much practicing Muslim. I learned that is the truth from my parents, and that's how I like believed. And what I thought about it is that, okay, when I get a bit of time, sometime in future, I will read more about the religion, and then I will learn more, become a better Muslim and all those. But that was actually the downfall. So after I moved to North America, after I finished my studies, before joining a job, I thought that, okay, now it's time. Let's try to be a better Muslim in this land of kafirs, and then I would be, a better person to God and all those. So started reading so first of all, not actually started reading the Quran. First of all, I used to look at all kinds of fatwa or masala for like everyday aspects of my life. And I used to bump into different websites. So one of the websites was islamqa.org, I think. It's a Salafist website maintained by some Salafist in Saudi Arabia. But and in there, all the masalas or fatwas, it sometimes felt contradictory and not to my conscience. So then I thought, okay, they might be wrong. So let's go back to the origin, which is the book of God, which is the Quran. And then that would definitely give me all those truths. So I started reading the Quran in my language, in translation in English. And I like couldn't go past a couple of pages. And I was kind of like, what the heck is this? And started then doing some search, like looking up of like whether the literal translation of Quran is that it, or like what are the different meanings or tafsirs and all those. And eventually during the search, I actually got into a series of video by the Masked Arab. I don't know if you know this guy.
Yes, we've had him on the show once as well. He's based, I think, here in the UK somewhere.
Right. And oh my God, he's amazing. Like I bumped into a few videos of that. And that was in one weekend, I remember. I was in front of my computer the whole 2 days, just listening to his videos and like finding out the truth. Like every time he would give a reference, I would go back to Quran and try and read that. And I'll see that, oh my God, it's right in there. Like he's not lying. All the things he's saying is correct. So yeah, that was a very, I would say, painful experience of realizing that I have been told a lie since my childhood, and I have been following this lie, and then that's how and then all the other things were like, I would say, a catastrophic fall of my belief. Like everything fell down from there.
So he was definitely the catalyst. Was it the Masked Arab?
Yes, like his videos were so well researched and so well reasoned, and like you cannot really, if you have an open mind, you cannot really go past those.
Well, that's great to hear, because obviously you're using your critical thinking and you're open to hear other ideas, and you've presumably looked into it yourself. And I keep saying it, ex-Muslims like the Masked Arab, and I keep forgetting him, and many others, Harris Sultan and many others out there that are well known. They are kryptonite to Islam and to certain Muslims like yourself, or ex-Muslims like yourself, who are looking to hear other views. They really are. They've had many of the same experiences or stories or so forth, and they know Islam very well and so forth. And so when you listen to them, you go, oh yeah, and that's why I always want to have people like that on the show, because there's so many of them that can't come out in various countries and will be in serious danger if they did. And even here, we have people in the UK and panel members that join us from time to time that are that can't say, that can't give full details and so forth because of repercussions. And so having people like yourself and him and others, I think I'd like to make this platform more available to more ex-Muslims to come and tell their story as you have. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been an honor that you gave me this space to join this show. And the one thing that I think I would say that there are a lot of efforts going on all around to talk to these particular scriptures and Islam overall and all those. But your show, I think, attracts a little bit of a higher intellect guests who would have better reasoning, better logic. Yeah, sorry, you were saying something?
No, not myself. Sorry. Carry on.
I said I wish.
Yes, I mean, we're looking for that. That was what you were saying. Sorry, if you meant, you'd like to hear more on that show. Yes, we want the same. And there was a Muslim gentleman in the chat at the moment that Stop Spamming had a conversation with him on Hangouts. The Hangout he was talking about earlier this week. And he would have come on here. I think he's on another Hangout now, from what I can tell, in sort of some other chats in the background here. But that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for the people with poor reasoning skills that don't really have knowledge of Islam and who can make logical fallacies, because then people point the finger. Oh, you guys are going for lower hanging fruit. Now, obviously, these Muslims that come on here don't think they're low hanging fruit, but other Muslims accuse us, or have in the past accused us of that. So we do want Muslims that can articulate themselves well, that won't bring up, the logical fallacies that waste a lot of time, and will bring forward things and hear the position and represent us accurately. That for me is, because I've experienced such a lot of that being the opposite, that for me is like a criteria. Once I hear you're not doing that and you do it multiple times, then for me, you're gone, because it's just, you're not being intellectually honest. So yes, and if you know any Muslims that you can push our way that want to come and have that discussion, that's what we want more of here for 2019, is getting more Muslims on the show that we can have that discussion with at a higher level, where there's not so much emotion and we're tackling the arguments. And it's something that Thunderous said earlier. If for example I was called a prick or whatever the case is, but I've trained myself, and again, I think just on that point, I've trained myself not to react emotionally. So when I hear that word, for example, I'm like, okay, what's the evidence for that? What have I said? I don't take it. So my mindset has been changed, and that's my wish for other people as well, not to take the word on board, but to ask yourself a question. Why is the person saying X? Because it's just a representation of their assessment of you at that moment, or whatever the case is. Have they got reasons? I mean, I've been called racist, white supremacist, you name it. All of us have had on the show here, have had, those sort of words. And it's like, okay, why do you say that? Have you got evidence for that? So just a side note, but yes. So if you can bring any Muslims that are, at a higher level, that we can have that discussion where there's not the insults and that, and we're going into the information, then that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, actually, I would say something pretty much on the contrary. And now I might contradict myself a little bit in there, but if you are solid in reasoning, and if you can reason, I don't think you would be able to hold on to your beliefs that long. Like it's kind of a what do you call, a paradox, that you can be a Muslim at the same time you can be a well-reasoned person. The way I used to be a Muslim is that I was ignorant. I was well-reasoned, but I did not know anything about Islam. I was given an illusion of Islam by my parents and my society. And as I said, like, I was fed a lot of stories and myths and all those things, which I did not check. And I knew that I was not checking those. I was just taking those as kind of, okay, I don't have the time to check those, so I will take those as face value for now, and I have the intention to check those later. But if you go on and check those facts, I don't think, if you're well-reasoned, you would be able to hold on to your faith long.
Yeah, I think we agree with you. I just use the slightly different words, but it's virtually the same. I think it's the critical thinking for me, that if you were thinking critically at the highest level possible, and you do see Muslims engage in their critical thinking when they are challenging, well, to some degree anyway, when they're challenging atheists or Christians or whatever, but put that onto their own worldview, because I stand outside and I can see Christians and atheists having, the go at each other, and they can see the challenges in each other's books, seemingly in their view, clearly. But certainly from an Islamic point of view, then when it's asked of them to look at their own books with the same level of critique that they use for quote unquote atheism or Christianity or anything else for that matter, then that sort of dissolves. And by the way, atheists are not immune from this. And we were talking earlier about one of our atheist colleagues who's sort of, from our point of view, gone down that route of dropping critical thinking in a particular area not related to religion, and seemingly gone down the route of being like a little bit of a dogmatic fundamentalist, although that may be a strong word, but along those lines, where the critical thinking now has dropped because emotions and a certain narrative is more important, or is overriding the critical thinking. So I think that, that can always happen.
Right. No, I tend to agree to that as well. But at the same time, I was also going to say that to your comment, that it can take it to a little bit of a tangent, is that I would say the same thing about Islam or Christianity or any other faith as such, which says that there is something that is set in stone, sent from the sky in a book or whatever, and that is for eternity, the guidance for mankind. I kind of do not think that is true for whatever religion that they say. I do think that it's not only about evolution of the physical beings or life form in the world. It's also true for the evolution of thought, the evolution of ideas about well-being and all those. That is also true. That has changed over the history of mankind, and that change is, I think, the only constant. So whoever comes and claims that this is like the ultimate set in stone perfect truth, I think there is a problem in there. I don't know about you guys, but that is.
I think the theist could respond, well, hey, what you've just said there, Mahmoud, is you've got the subjective view. It's always changing, so it changes according to the will of the group or people or whatever at the particular time. And who's to say that it won't change in the future? So you guys think it's right now, but it could be wrong at some other point. And they would make the point that they feel is quite strong, which is, hey, if you have an omnipotent, omniscient God and he's sent down some rules, those wouldn't change, and therefore we are more justified in claiming that those rules are objective or are unchanging, whereas you guys who are non-religious keep changing. And so that argument obviously is more the moral argument, generally speaking, but it could be on other facts and so forth as well. Well, hey, that's not really a fact, but God has given us these facts and they're unchanging. You guys keep changing or keep, I'd say, that's often what I hear. So they would obviously feel like that's a strong argument in their favor. And as I say, we will be having a philosopher on in January who will go through the moral argument, both from a non-theist position and then challenge the theist argument in terms of objective morality. But I can see that being the case. So one needs to have a response, and I think a good one around that, because otherwise, if you're accused of moral relativism, I'm not sure, to be honest, that there is really any moral relativist, but it could be, and I welcome somebody who's non-religious, obviously, to come on. I don't think there's going to be many religious people who are moral relativists, as far as I can tell anyway, and challenge it, because I don't know that really, when we get down to the nuts and bolts, that people are a moral relativist, because I'll ask certain questions, we'll get to a foundation, which I don't think does change. And so, but we've got to be aware of that, because that will immediately be seized upon or critiqued by most theists if you say we keep changing, and well, that's a good thing. While I agree with you, I think there's more to it than that, and presumably, and you said a few words there that make me think you have looked into a few of those things anyway.
Yeah, to some extent, I studied about the subjective versus objective morality. To some extent, I wouldn't say that I know everything or I know a bunch of it, but I kind of know the basis of that. And to your point, like, the way I want to see this is more like something that is not changing in the immediate or medium term. I can agree to that. For example, like, think about the scientific process. Whenever we do have a question about anything, we do hypothesize, right? and then we go about searching for evidence for those hypotheses. And as evidence mounts in one hypothesis or the other, we kind of tend to agree that, okay, yeah, that is likely to be the truth. And then as we get more and more evidence, we get more certain about that. Like, for example, gravity, right? We get more and more evidence in favor of gravity, and then we say, okay, this probably is a law. But then again, it might be only a particular circumstance when gravity works. Like if you go beyond our, like beyond this physical world and go into the quantum level, then some of the laws wouldn't work in there. So that's how, like, you probably would have to look at things relative to different perspectives. And I think that is the same thing for morality as well. Like, speaking the truth or not killing anybody, any human being, etc., might be the highest standard of morality and probably will be there for the longest or the widest set of circumstances, but it's not like 100%. It's not going to be that in 100% of the cases, killing a human being is immoral. Like, for example, the physician's assisted death, which we do have in Canada, right? So that's where a physician is killing a person, and that is a way more moral than like letting the person leave in that absolute misery they are in. So that's how my argument is kind of about the objective versus subjective reality, that everything needs a context and everything might change based on the context and perspective, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah, and I think actually theists would agree that situational ethics are something that most theists would accept if they think about it. They would still say there's an underlying objectivity, which is God has sent us down. We can now use that in certain circumstances because God is not necessarily going to tell us every single possible human circumstance, although he could. He hasn't done so, but we have an objective set of rules that we can use. And you know, I guess theists could argue, for example, the Ten Commandments, and Thunderous is here. I don't want us to go off too much on a tangent, but if God said, "Thou shalt not kill," could the theist argue, and they probably could point to something in the Bible or perhaps even the Qur'an, which says, yes, but this circumstance that is different. Now, if that's not the case, then I think that is a challenge. If, for example, do not kill is an absolute moral that can never be changed, then I think that would put people that believe that in a bit of a quandary, because we can easily find examples, as you've quite rightly said, where the situation would demand the taking of the life of somebody else, and that would be deemed moral by any responsible person or anybody that really has thought about this for more than a few moments as a moral act. So I think, you know, thou shalt not kill in every instance is not an absolute moral command. But the general, maybe they could argue, maybe the general point is not to kill unjustifiably. But again, one could ask the question, you know, could the command not have been tweaked slightly to make that more clear? But that might take us on a tangent. I do want to ask a question, and then Thunderous, if you do want to respond or stops, jump in. Somebody's asking, Jinn&Tonic, is somebody if somebody is irrational enough to fall for a false belief system, would you say they're being intellectually dishonest? Okay, so good question. If somebody is irrational enough, well, it depends. We'd have to fall for a false. They would need to know that it's false. So if they knowingly fell for it, then yes, that would be intellectually dishonest. If they believe in some worldview and accept it, then no, they wouldn't be intellectually dishonest. If it could be demonstrably demonstrated that it's false, then yes, they still held to it, then they would be intellectually dishonest. But I think most people that believe
it's the willful,
genuinely believe that obviously it's not false, because I think, yeah, that would be irrational if you're going, yeah, I've only ever had one person in a hangout ever in my 2 years, and maybe other guys have had more, that said they did not care about what was true. And at that stage, the discussion with that person was over. There was nothing more that could be said. But virtually nobody that I have a discussion with goes along that route.
Yeah, I think for me too, it's the willful that makes the difference.
Yeah, I'd certainly concur with that. I mean, nobody. I've always had the view that nobody follows a religion knowing it's a lie. If they're in a religion, they're in that religion because they believe it to be truth. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in that religion. So that's my outlook, and I don't think it's any different to what you guys have said.
I mean, I can see people accepting religion, A, because they think it's true to whatever level. Perhaps they haven't looked into it deeply, but there are utilitarian views or values that they've taken it for, i.e., hey, I've now got a brother, this makes me feel good, or they can give some other reason other than it's not true. I've never argued that that's not the case, that religion cannot act as a utility for people. But I agree that, if you didn't believe it was true and you simply believed because it made you feel good or there was some reason other than its truth value, then yes, that would be irrational. But I think, as you guys have said, there's very few. There might be one or two, but again, if they were open to critique and we had the discussion, I think they would quite quickly come to the point that A, they're irrational, and if they were and they accepted that, then obviously you couldn't really have a discussion if there was such a person.
I have a quick top-up question for you guys on that. Have you guys talked to anybody who used to be a preacher and then eventually realized and left their religion? Have you guys talked to anybody like that and asked them the question that, well, you have been preaching this religion maybe for 10, 20, 15 years. What happened to you during that long period of time? Like, how could you manage under your belt that 15 years? And you cannot say without knowing because you were preaching that religion.
Well, we've had a go ahead, Stops. You've had many discussions, I think, like that, or at least some.
Well, no, I have not had anybody per se who used to be a preacher, who finished seminary, or who actually. Imam is nothing, okay. But we all know of several people who have gone through this, who have said the deeper I went, the more I realized I was living a lie. And that is why there is a special project which is only for priests and imams and people like that who have gone deep into the religion and have realized that it's not right, and how to get them out of it and to put them together, to put them in touch with each other, to compare notes, to make them realize that they are not alone.
Yes, the clergy project, I think, is what you're referring to, or at least one of the projects that I'm aware of.
Yeah, but not everybody knows.
No. The one person we have had on the show here once, and I chatted to him today as it happens, is a Muslim gentleman by the name of Hassan Radwan. And he was a Muslim scholar and teacher. He taught at school, he taught Muslims, and he has a fairly good knowledge and comprehension of Islam, and he is now a non-Muslim, ex-Muslim. He sort of still decides on his label, because he gets flack from different people, so he hasn't sort of settled on the label, but he's certainly not a Muslim, so at least an ex-Muslim, and he did it for 25 or however many years, and Stops knows him. He was actually one of the people that started the Jinn&Tonic some 10 years ago, I guess, or something like that.
It's unbelievable, eh? Yeah.
So yes, we've had somebody like that.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, I listened to your show, Stop Spamming. You sound like Hassan Radwan so much.
What?
You're like,
okay, that's the first time I hear that one.
Yeah, you guys a very identical voice, and I think you both are British, right? So you got the similar accent.
No, not quite. He's South African like me, so we both have a South African accent. Although I live in the UK and Stops lives somewhere else.
Don't tell him that. Come on, I was just enjoying the compliment.
Let me just ask another question. There's another couple of questions here, so we'll go for a while, and we can put the link in the chat if we have anybody.
I did. If anybody wants to join, I put the
particularly if
link
you're
in
Muslim,
the chat.
ideally like to have a Muslim. Jinn&Tonic, can you ask him meaning Mahmoud, I'm assuming, how his family took his deconversion? Without going to details, how did your family take that, if they are in fact still Muslim?
I'm still pretty much closeted, I would say.
Okay.
My wife knows, but she's cool with that. She didn't marry me for the religion, so she's not gonna leave me for the religion. She's got her own way of practicing Islam, and she's pretty chill. Like, she's not that deep into it. My parents are, although as I said, like they are very strict Muslims. I kind of broke it because I don't know if you would agree with me on that, is that it is very hard to conceal, at least with people who you are pretty close with. So I kind of came out a little bit to my parents, and they were devastated. They were crying. They were like fearful of me burning in hell forever. So I kind of stopped talking about this thing with them. Like I just don't talk about this. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Just looking if there's any other questions, because that's often a challenge, especially if you deconvert and you have a Muslim family. Very often there is some tension and turmoil, to say the least. So your one doesn't sound quite so bad as some others. I mean, we've had ex-Muslims on here where, you know, they've been completely rejected by the family and the community, and some have even had death threats. And, you know, obviously worse has happened in other countries. So, and again, you know, one needs to remember and point out that that doesn't appear to happen with any other conversion, deconversion, as far as I can tell, from any other religion. I mean, the closest you get is Scientology. When they leave, they sort of get cut off from family members that are still in Scientology, etc. But, you know, I think everybody agrees that that's really is a cult. That couldn't possibly be a religion, and they're going off on tangent slightly, but they're what's the word? Sort of bankrolling, and the pressure they got to become a religion was incredible. And I could briefly tell that story, or a little bit of the story that I heard about that. You would be surprised. So, you know, apart from that cult, I'm not aware of any other religions where people leaving and, you know, have quite the same level of tension. I mean, I'm sure, you know, in the deep South, maybe in the US, there might be families that'll disown or you know, not want to be involved. Jehovah's another one. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I know a little bit about Jehovah's Witnesses because I've taken the time to listen to what they've got to say when they come around the door. And what that thing that you're talking about there is it disfellowshipping? Actually, I've looked into that, and there are scriptural references to confirm that if a person has, say, behaved in an inappropriate way, there is a biblical precedent that is set down how to treat people that have behaved like that. So, though you're bringing that out about Jehovah's Witnesses, I have taken the time to study the material that they've presented, and in my opinion, they're thoroughly vindicated on that, just as much as they're thoroughly vindicated on their stand on blood transfusions.
Well, half the family on my side is Jehovah's.
Wow.
Then you know, then stops that they are. If that's true, and I'm not challenging your integrity on that, but then you know that they'll pull out the Bible and they'll confirm that their stand on Jehovah's Witnesses and disfellowshipping or disassociation is vindicated.
No, but no, they will not talk.
Yeah,
they are not allowed to speak to people like me. They're not allowed to speak to my wife. They're not allowed to speak to our side of the family who is not Jehovah's anymore.
No. Are you an ex-Jehovah's Witness then?
Not me. No. I never.
If a person was a Jehovah's Witness and they've been disfellowshipped, they can't have communication with other
Correct.
witnesses. Yes, but that is vindicated in the Bible. The scriptures are there to confirm that, depending on on what their stand is, and they can have that communication back with them once they're reinstated.
Yeah.
But if you're saying that you have family members that are Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm not saying that as if I'm doubting you. What I should be saying, and forgive me, let me make a retraction and repeat myself, or say it more correctly and respectfully. Your family that are Jehovah's Witnesses, they should have or provide you the sufficient information to give you the scriptural references to confirm their stand against a disfellowshipped family member.
Yeah, but number one, I said quite openly that I was an atheist, and number two, that I knew about their scripture, and that is the shut door.
Yeah. Okay, I want to.
So, I mean, there's one sister who still speaks, but in secret. She's not allowed to openly do it. The same with the mother. She's not allowed to do it, but they do it in secret.
But if Jehovah is the real God and he's alive and he's watching, and even though they think that they're being discreet, they're just being crafty and they can't fool him, can they?
No, it's the comfort, it's the social aspect, it's their environment, it's their entire life. If they were to leave this, they would not have a life anymore, because everything they do is part of Jehovah's. Everything. It's as soon as they stop working, as soon as they do anything else, it's Jehovah's Witnesses. This is the entire world is built like that.
But I think if you looked at any religion, logically speaking, this is what goes back to my point about earlier on. If you're in a particular religion, then as far as you're concerned, you believe that religion to be truth. If you believe that religion to be truth, by implication, everything else is a lie. For instance, if you're a Hindu, if you follow Hinduism,
no, I understand, Thunderous. I understand what you are trying to say. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is that my brother, for example, he was in a what do you call these cults? Jesus prosperity cult or something like this, with what's his face in Singapore, and Prince something in Singapore. Anyway, and he donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to this guy, Joseph Prince. There you go. And this Joseph Prince guy, even though he ran the money aspect, my brother was still able to talk to me. I was still able to visit with him. We still had a very good communication level, which we can't do, which we can't maintain or keep with those people who are Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay, they're not allowed to. He was never not allowed.
Where are we going with this, though, guys? I just want to check in that we don't go off on a huge tangent here. What's the point with the Jehovah's thing?
We're comparing the different levels of communication between different groups.
But stops. But obviously the other organisation that you've mentioned there, the Prince one, are not following Scripture. Then are they? When it comes to situations like that, it's a bit like you can have Jehovah's organisation or the Christadelphians and that believe that there is a God and that God created Adam and Eve, and then you've got another religion like Catholicism and the Church of England that believe that evolution is true.
Yes, there you go. Exactly. So there's different levels of delusion. Yeah.
Yeah, but irrespective of what the delusion is, it is the text of the religion that define the religion, not the adherents. For instance, the Bible defines what Christianity is, not Christians. The Quran, this goes back to a conversation you and I had months ago. The Quran defines what Muslims are, not Muslims. The Quran defines Islam, not Muslims. And it's the same. But with Christianity, if those guidelines are there as to how to treat people who have apostatized or have been removed from the congregation, that the Bible defines those actions, not one religion does, one religion doesn't. Because the religion that doesn't follow those guidelines is clearly disobeying the book. It's a bit like the peaceful Muslim and the violent Muslim. The Muslim who is violent.
Okay. Let's leave it because we're going too much into this.
Okay, sorry.
All right, I want to welcome in somebody here, a new joiner. He's not joined us before. I don't know how to pronounce that, but you are here with us. Do you want to share with us a little bit about yourself and what you'd like to add to the show? If you can unmute yourself, Riekt. I don't know how to pronounce it. My apologies.
No problem. How do I unmute? Yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. Hi. Good evening to you.
Hi. Good evening, gentlemen. Great show. I've listened to a couple of your episodes, and I really like what you guys are doing. A bit about myself. I'm calling in from, well, I wouldn't like to say where exactly, but from Africa. I've been all over the place, from Cape Town, where some of you, the South Africans, are aware of that, to East Africa, to West Africa. But I come from a country with about 50% Muslim population, and my family is also split. There are Christians within my family, there are Muslims within my family, all sorts of people. So I have my late mother, she was also Muslim, and most of my family from my mother's side, they're also Muslim. Some of them are very, very devout. So I've had an interesting background, but I'll just like to add a few things, maybe a different perspective that you guys wouldn't normally have. I strongly believe, and I can give you the quote from the Quran, that if you read the biographies of Prophet Muhammad, not the Sarah, the other ones, some of them that are written by, I've read several. One of them was written by the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Muhammad Qutb or something like that. One thing that from my reading of that and from the Quran that is very clear to me is that Islam was meant for Arabs. If you are not an Arab, Islam is not for you. I mean, a quote from that, a direct quote from that, and I've challenged many of my Muslim friends and relatives about this, and yet they can't give me an answer. If you look at verse 12, all of it, it says that we have revealed the Quran in Arabic so that you may understand it. These are the words. I'm not quoting exactly, but words to that effect. So the Quran was revealed in Arabic so that you may understand it. To me, this is very clear. The Quran was aimed to Arabs. And that is why within Islam, I've lived with Islam very, very close, at very close quarters. A lot of what Islam does is Arabic related. If you have to pray, you have to pray in Arabic. The call to prayer, the adhan is in Arabic. If you want to do the Shahada, you have to do it in Arabic. So Islam was for Arabs. And I can, now, coming as an African now, I challenge many of my African brothers and sisters about this, and they cannot give me an answer. There are some things that are common to all Africans. You can maybe say common to all people all over the world. One of the things that is a big problem for Africans, and Muslims cannot answer this, is the marriage of Prophet Muhammad and Aisha. And it is not so much the age of Aisha, is that in most African societies, if a daughter of your friend is in fact your daughter, in almost everywhere you go, whether you ask a Zulu in South Africa, or you ask a Maasai in East Africa, or you ask a Dinka in Southern Sudan, the idea of me going to my friend and I tell him, excuse me, there's this young lady of yours, let's put the age aside, I want to marry one of your daughters. That will be the end of the friendship there and then. It will be like asking to marry your own daughter. This is just one, and it gets worse. I mean, the marriage of Ali, the Prophet's cousin, his second wife, is one of the Prophet's granddaughter through Hadija. All right. Also, that is a problem. But people, like one of the speakers mentioned earlier, most Muslims, all they do, they don't know anything about Islam. All they do is what the mullah tells them on Friday, or the imam tells them on Friday, and that's about it. But if you challenge them in detail about the history of Islam, how Islam spread, for example, some of the doctrines of Islam, things like slavery, beating up of the wife, and things like that, they cannot answer. And I sympathize with your show, because these people, they've been told, or they've been brainwashed for so long, that Islam, and that number one, the Quran is perfect, and number two, that Muhammad is perfect. So once you have put somebody on such a pedestal, that this person is perfect and his book is also perfect, there is no room to criticize, or there is no room to start engaging reason in this discussion. It doesn't feature. All right. But if, for example, the Quran was a little bit higher, if the idea of perfection was not associated with Prophet Muhammad, or was not associated with the Quran, then reason can come into it. You can say, okay, fine, this one doesn't make sense, or maybe this particular verse applied at that particular time. The problem that the Bible doesn't have, because the Bible is not perfect. The Bible doesn't say this is a perfect book for all men for all time. So these are some of the challenges that we have with Muslims. And also, the thing is, the Muslims themselves believe this, that all of us should also believe, whether you're a Muslim or not, that the Quran is perfect. Even though we all know that there is no such thing as perfection. It may be perfect for a certain group of people for a certain period of time. Yes, I could grant them that, but not perfect for all men, for all time, for all eternity. It doesn't work. And this is the problem many Muslims have, and this is the problem of why Islam cannot undergo a reformation like Christianity did, because it is already perfect. How can you reform that which is perfect? How can you improve that which is perfect? You can't. They just run around into. I've had this discussion for so long, to such an extent that within my family and friends, I don't talk about it anymore because they cannot answer me. For example, the issue of the Quran. I don't know if you've covered this in one of the shows before. Actually, in order for one to be a Muslim in the strictest definition of Islam, you don't need the Quran. And why do I say this? Because if I ask many of my Muslim friends, they say, look, if you remove Prophet Muhammad, who was the first person to become a Muslim after Prophet Muhammad? Who was the first person to become a prophet, to become a Muslim? To say, Prophet Muhammad, I believe in you, you're the prophet of God, and I believe in your message. Who was it? There are two candidates. One of them is Khadija, his wife. The first time Prophet, he had this visitation from the archangel, he thought he was going mad, and he ran to his wife. And his wife told him, no, if you believe what you say is from God, then it is from God. So he's the candidate. Another one is Ali, Ali, the Prophet's cousin. When he was, when Prophet Muhammad had not even started spreading the message to the Arabs outside of his immediate family, Ali stood up with him and said, Ya Rasulullah, if you say you are the Prophet of God, I believe in you, I will stand with you. Now, the question is, how did Khadija and Ali become Muslims? Because at that time, the Quran was not there. Because at that time, the first verse that the Prophet Muhammad received was Iqra, recite in the name of your Lord, and it goes on and it goes on. All right. Now, if Khadija became a Muslim based on that sentence, that recite in the name of your Lord, then why do you need the whole of the Quran now to be a Muslim? How did people like Abu Bakr become Muslims? The Quran wasn't written. How did Omar become a Muslim? So you don't need the Quran effectively. Yeah.
Sarah did this as well. He also brought this up. It's sheer logics. Yeah.
Yeah. So but the moment is going back to the point of Shirk now. Prophet Muhammad and God have become the same thing, and now the Quran is also a part of the Trinity. Now they've gone back to the Christians. Now the Trinity is Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, Allah, and the Quran. The three of them is a Trinity.
Yes, because some people have pointed that out as well as a critique of, obviously, because they strictly claim to be monotheistic, but then the Quran has existed for eternity alongside Allah. And as you say, then Muhammad is his messenger. And as you say, we've read out a number of these verses. Well, it's brilliant to have somebody from Africa. So a warm welcome if you want to join us again in the future. Presumably, from everything you're saying, you're a non-Muslim or an
I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Muslim. I never was a Muslim.
Okay.
But Muslims are very close to my family, friends. And one thing I would like to add, I might show I'm not that old, but I'm in my 40s. One thing I would like to add, because I've grown up in Muslim families. When I was a youngster, not long ago, but when I was a youngster, this idea of this is intolerant Islam that we are seeing right now, the one you alluded to earlier, did not exist. All right. I have pictures of my family going back in the 60s and earlier in the 50s. People were just dressed normally. There was none of this hijab business going around. Okay, my family didn't drink, but I do have some of my uncles who are Muslim and they were drinking and everything else. Like at least in East Africa, in places like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, place like there, being a Muslim in East Africa was nothing special. It was just like being, being a Catholic in Italy. There was nothing special to you, all right? You could interact with people and things like that. Unfortunately, from the time I could remember, from about early 80s, 81, 82, 83, things Muslim began to be more conservative. You began to see, you began to see a lot of the colorful African dresses were going away. In come the black thing that they were in Arabia. All of that started spreading now. So in order for somebody to be seen as a Muslim woman, you had to dress like that. Where naturally, you guys who come from South Africa, the colorful dresses or the colorful cloth that African women wear out. Now, you can't tell me that 100 years ago, people in East Africa, and Islam has been in East Africa for a long time. Huh? You cannot tell me that 100 years ago, those people then were not Muslims. It's not true. Something happened here to bring this intolerant version of Islam around. There were many versions that existed. For example, the type of Islam that existed in Somalia before the current one was a very tolerant Islam. Islam that could mix with all other people. The same thing that existed in Sudan. Unfortunately, all these other versions have been wiped out. So we are getting now is the hardcore that it is our way or nothing else. It is our way or your kufr. So this is the
But
Let me ask you
Reacted, can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Would you be available to have a short lecture on this where you get some information together, show the sources, do this? Because it looks like you have a lot of experience
Yes.
and you have a lot of passion for this. So if you have the
Absolutely.
passion, you have the information, you have the background, you have the tenacity, and you have all the, the patience to do that, what I would like to have is for you to have one specific area where you could then say, okay, I'm going to look at, I don't know, the development of Islam in Kenya over the last 50 years or something like this.
Yeah.
Could you do something like that?
Okay, it will take some time in between doing other things, but I could prepare something and then I could come into it.
that would be great.
There is
I think
book,
it's a waste now to talk about this because we're getting towards the end of the show, and now there's less and less people watching. So it would be a pity to waste your talent and your experience that you have and your background, which I think would be really interesting if we really put this at the beginning of a show. But then to really pinpoint it down, not to take a broad approach like what you're doing at the moment.
I have your details, and I watch because at the moment it's 2:00 on my side, so I watch religiously your show. I'll prepare something that I can get in touch with you guys.
Well, thank you so much for that.
And then we can see it. But anyway, one last point. Going back to freedom of expression, freedom of speech. The people in the West, in European countries, in America, I think you're completely losing it. You know, I'm serious. I'm honest, because the Western civilization or the Western ways of doing things is built on, somebody says, the mother of all freedom, which is the freedom of expression. Once you remove the freedom of expression, everything else falls down. Now, the thing is, in most of these Western countries, okay, I've lived in the West for some years in the past. I used to live in England for many years. But in most Western countries or Western societies, everybody else that is not from there are immigrants. Why would an immigrant coming to a place that these people chose, they chose to live in the UK, or they choose to live in France, or they choose to live in America? All right. The pushback I gave to them is this: if the West is so bad, why don't they go somewhere else? And the example for this is the example of the Prophet. When things in Mecca were so bad, what did the Prophet do? He and his followers packed up and went to Medina, all right, where they could practice their faith freely, all right? So why would anybody, and why would the authorities in the Western countries allow people to come into the country? Rightly or wrongly, people are there, they've settled there for 1 or 2 generations. But what makes the West is these freedoms that everybody's taking for granted, which now are being eroded, you know? It's a shame.
Yep. Yeah, I think we agree with you on that. And I think it's a case of wanting to be tolerant. You know, Western democracies have a double-edged sword. They want to be tolerant to all groups and to all people. But as you pointed out, some groups are less tolerant. And then it sort of becomes the question of, at what point do you stop tolerating intolerance of your views? And I think that's where, I've put forward the view that if you come to a country, and Australia did this a while back, you've got very strict rules about what you can do. You can bring a culture, but if there's a conflict with your culture and with the society you're coming into, your culture must give way to that. And if you don't accept that, then this is not the country for you. And I think, people can lie and so forth, but at least if that's made clear and there's some sort of documentation on that, then you have a legitimate case to, in severe cases at least, deport those people back to where they came from, because they clearly don't want to be in this country. So that's one way to do that.
Yeah, the example I use with some of my family, these fundamentalists, that what I keep telling them is this: look, if a Western woman goes to Saudi Arabia, nobody will expect her to wear a bikini and walk down the street, because it is not done in Saudi Arabia. That is not the done thing there. But the opposite also applies. If a Saudi woman goes to downtown Paris, for example, or they're walking around in Oxford Street, then you should conform to what people do in Oxford Street. Otherwise, don't go.
Yeah, but that's the sort of double standard, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Where there's an expectation in the Western world that everybody can do whatever they want, but you go to some of those other countries. But then, of course, those people that are doing that in this country will go, no, we don't agree with those, those countries like Saudi Arabia. If I was in that country, I'd allow people to do that. Would you really? I'm not sure you would. I think that's more.
No, society wouldn't accept it. Yeah.
No, I think that's just wordplay to try and be consistent. So.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. I enjoy your show, and please keep up the good work.
And you, and can you see my email address in the chat here on the side? hopefully you can. If not, I'll post it into the main chat as well. So if you can,
please do.
Please just drop me an email when you have a moment over the next day or so that I remember who you are, because we chat to so many different people. And then we arrange over email to come up with a topic. And as I say, as Stops has pointed out, you've got some experience. You've come at it from you've got quite a bit of experience with all kinds of different people, and you're bringing an African perspective, which I think is missing on the show. So I think, we'd love to have that from you at some point, hopefully in the first quarter next year, if you can fit that in.
Inshallah.
Brilliant.
Okay, thanks.
Super. Thank you very much for that.
I think we're coming towards the end now. So you guys are welcome to stay on until.
And guess what? I've got a hadith of the week.
Hey, have you got a hadith?
Guys, before you do that, I just had one quick point. I like the way you have these routine parts in the show, like hadiths of the week, or in the beginning, you do some comment, criticism, and all those. Can you include something like a myth buster for religion? And that would be that some of those myths that religion propagates and keeps its followers in its faith and don't let them go. I think because that was my big thing, why I held on to the religion, because I was fed all those myths and I thought, okay, yeah, that must be true. Like, for example, the simple things that the Quran is intact, or the Quran has been, there is only one Quran in the world, or Prophet Muhammad never killed a person. Prophet Muhammad never unjustifiably punished anybody, something like that. So you can pick up on some of those myths and bust those in this show for the Muslims to then understand and gradually come out of those myths and start thinking about their religion critically.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Not really, and I'll tell you why. If we make claims and we say, well, this is what it says in the Quran and this is why this is wrong, that is exactly the moment when Muslims come and they say, well, you don't understand what you're talking about. This is why what we do is we react to claims. So if somebody says, okay, here's what the Quran says, and this is why I think this is correct, then we have something on the table that we can look at, we can inspect this, we can investigate this, and then we can react to it. But if we go and actively go and make claims ourselves, then we are opening ourselves up to criticism, which is very tedious and incredibly difficult to get hold of. I appreciate what you are saying, and it's absolutely correct. And we do this in our individual videos. But in an individual video, we can take the claim, we can look at the background, we can put all the sources together, and then we can collect everything and present everything in a concise manner, showing all the background, which is something we cannot do here live on the show. So if we go and make claims here, this is very difficult to get out of it. If somebody wants to try and nail us down and says, well, show me where you get this from. You don't understand this. Show me the translation and the background. And then it's impossible to do that. So it's very difficult.
Well, I was going to say, I like the idea, and yeah, as Stop says, in a way, it would either be a show in and of itself, and that would require quite a bit of work, which sometimes we can do. I think what we could do is possibly look at doing something, especially if you brought something up yourself, or if you've done some research yourself, Mahmoud, then again, we can have you in as a guest to do something like that. And
as a topic, yes.
Yeah, it could be a topic. And most of these things, as you've quite rightly said, is claims that are made, although not every Muslim makes them or knows to make them, or would want them to be known, externally. But I think if that's something of interest to you, apart from that, from our separate videos that we're working on for next year, then I'm happy to invite you in to do kind of what we were going to do with the other gentleman, and see if we can do that. And then we'll make a show round. We only need sort of 15 minutes to half an hour or something like that, where we can go through it. But then you would need some sources. So that's the main thing. And then, between some of us, we can look things up very quickly as well. Stops has got quite a bit of knowledge. So if people do come on, then we've got some sources that that we can present to them and they can examine. Because we will obviously get.
Would you be willing to do that? Because this would be my next point now, to ask you, would you be willing to come on, take a topic which interested you, because you now have this specific knowledge from this ex-Muslim perspective, which none of us has. So if you could then say, well, what really convinced me, what really impressed me, or what really, took my fancy, or what I was afraid of even, was this. And let's take a look at this, and then you can go and dissect it and present it here. Would you be able to do that? Would you want to do that?
Amazing. Oh yeah, I totally would like to. Let me think about it, given that like my job and the show when it happens.
Yes. Yeah.
To like come myself and present things. But I definitely will take it away and let you guys know. Thank you for the offer. At the same time, I understand what you're saying, Stops, that although it sounds like a good idea, if we start with a claim, then it's the onus is on us to like either establish or debunk the claim rather than
precisely.
Can I just say, technically, we have kind of started doing things like that. It was several weeks ago with the 90-foot Adam, which then we. And also, Khadija being the first prophet of Islam, or the originator of Islam. So technically, what I've been thinking of doing, or the things that I've been doing, or the research I've been putting into, is picking out subjects that, that are in line with what you're saying, Mahmood.
Absolutely, yeah. I was also gonna say that those are absolutely great topics. And some of those could be the more common myths, which has like for example, the infallibility or the preservation of Quran. And there is just
exactly. Yes.
That sort of thing.
Okay. The same thing. You have the email address. Do you think that you can do that? I mean, let us know in advance. We don't need much headway, but just give a heads up and say, okay, I could be ready in 2 weeks to do this, and the topic will be this, because then I'll even run an ad video before that. So there are still things that we can do that we haven't fully exploited yet. So from a marketing point of view, we could do something. So if we have somebody like you who can input something like this, I would love this.
Sure, I definitely will give it a thought and let you know if I'm going to present.
Super.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay, Mahmoud, thank you very much.
You've got my email there, so just grab it in the side chat, or if you need it elsewhere, I'll put it in the main chat again. And I think on that note, let's bring it to a close. Stops if you can do that, and we'll put that for tonight.
So let's take a look at hellfire. And according to several hadiths, we learn where the heat in the desert comes from, because obviously, like we saw today, it's an Arab-centric narration, and it's narrated by Abu Sa'id. Allah's apostle said, pray, zuhr prayer, when it becomes a bit cooler, as the severity of heat is from the raging of the hellfire. Sahih Bukhari 1, book 10, 513.
Good stuff. And on that note,
now we know where it comes from, why it's so hot in the desert.
Exactly. There you go.
You guys
nothing to do with meteorology.
Do you guys also not think that if Muhammad was born in, let's say, Nordic countries, then hell would have made of ice rather than?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it could well have been that as well. On that note,
okay, guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Thunderous. Thank you, Mahmoud.
Thank you, guys, for allowing me to come on. I've got 1 or 2 ideas for other weeks. If you,
definitely.
If you need a week or two, where or if you need a slot, I've got other ideas. I was going to ask a question now for one of my ideas. Maybe you can think about it. It's more in line with what my stand is against Islam. And as you guys probably know, one of the arguments that Islam has is that the Bible's being corrupted. And this is probably one of my stronger arguments, is if you want, I know it's not in line with the way that your show has been governed for the past few years, but I can do an article about has the Bible been corrupted in the way that the Muslim religion suggests.
I think, yeah, we could probably, let's chat about that. And what I'd then ask you to do probably is to focus on where you feel the Quran is wrong versus the Bible. So yes, obviously you'll take some Bible verses presumably, but the focus would be on, okay, so these are the verses in the Quran that are wrong, and here's why they're wrong, and I'm giving the Bible, I'm giving some other sources.
Exactly.
We can chat on Facebook Messenger, James. So not a problem. So on that note, I'm going to bring the show to it.
Last year I brought the Quran, and this year you accepted Islam. Brilliant.
Cool. So we'll bring it to a close. We will be back for the final show of the year next Friday. And I'm already sort of thinking of a show topic of something like looking back on 2018 or something like that, where we can review 2018, look at some of the either the funny or the crazy or the whatever it may be. And then we'll be going into 2019. So on that note, I want to thank all of
Enjoy Christmas.
Yes, and if you celebrate Christmas, thank you very much, and enjoy that. And we'll see you next Friday for the final show of 2019.
Goodbye, James.
Good night.
Good night, guys.